A simple line appears before you. Two horizontal arrows stretch outward, one shorter, one longer. At first glance, the longer arrow seems much longer. But when you measure, they're exactly the same. This is the Müller-Lyer illusion, a trick that makes straight lines look crooked and a clear reality blur. Your eyes tell you one thing, but the truth slips through your fingers. It's not that your eyes are faulty, they're just following the patterns they've learned. They rely on shortcuts, ways to make sense of the world, and sometimes those shortcuts lead you astray. The longer arrow seems longer because it's paired with angled lines that make it appear distorted. But take those angles away, and the two arrows align perfectly. The trick is in how our brains interpret visual cues, even when they don't match the true shape. Think about it. How can two lines be the same length and still appear different? It's a reminder that perception isn't always truth. It's an interpretation, a constant filtering of the raw, unprocessed data around us. This illusion doesn't just play with your eyes. It digs into something deeper, the way we interpret everything. Our minds are trained to connect dots, to see meaning in the most subtle of patterns. But sometimes, those patterns are misleading. They're incomplete. Take a moment to consider your own perceptions. How many things in life seem one way, only to reveal themselves as something entirely different when examined closely? How often do we mistake one truth for another, only to find that reality holds something more complicated underneath? The Müller-Lyer illusion also shows us how easy it is to trust what we think we see. We believe the longer arrow is longer, it feels right. But when the angles change, so does the truth. And that truth was there all along. We just couldn't see it. There's a lesson here. Just because something feels real doesn't mean it is. Our senses are constantly interpreting the world around us, and those interpretations can be deceiving. What we think is true is sometimes just the result of how we've been trained to see. You might wonder if perception can lie to us about something as simple as lines on a page. How many other truths are out there, hidden beneath the surface of our understanding? What else might we be seeing that isn't really there, or not seeing at all? The trick of the Müller-Lyer illusion is in its simplicity. It's a small misstep in our perception. Yet that simple illusion tells us something profound. It suggests that nothing we see, hear, or touch is ever as straightforward as it seems. Our minds don't just passively receive the world, they actively construct it. They fill in gaps, make predictions, create images, and often those images are based on assumptions that turn out to be false. In some ways, the Müller-Lyer illusion is a metaphor for our entire experience of reality. What we perceive is shaped by our past, by our expectations, by the very tools we use to understand the world. And those tools, as powerful as they are, can sometimes deceive us. Could it be that reality, as we understand it, is an illusion crafted by our senses? What if what we see is only a shadow of something deeper, a truth hidden behind layers we aren't equipped to peel away? What if everything we think we know is just another trick our minds are playing? The lines in the Müller-Lyer illusion are simple, yet they carry with them a complex idea that reality is not as fixed as we think. If our eyes can be fooled by the placement of a few arrows, what else in our world could be bending the truth in unseen ways? In the grand scheme of things, this illusion invites us to question everything we hold certain. If a line can appear longer than it really is, what about the other things we believe to be true? How often does perception deceive us, and how many truths slip away unnoticed because we trust the first impression? The Müller-Lyer illusion isn't just a puzzle, it's an invitation to look deeper, to challenge the certainty that our eyes, our senses, and our understanding provide. Because the world, as we know it, is more fluid than it seems. How often do we shape our reality around the conclusions we've already drawn? How often do we trust what feels right, rather than what is actually there? This simple optical illusion reminds us things are not always as they appear. And perhaps the real paradox lies in the gap between what we see and what truly exists. If perception can deceive us so easily with something as simple as a line, what happens when we try to interpret the much bigger, much more complex ideas of existence itself? Perception tricks us, time and time again. The world may not be as solid and certain as we believe, but in that uncertainty, we find something more profound. Because reality, like the Müller-Lyer illusion, is always a little bit more elusive than we can fully grasp. And as we stretch our minds to grasp it, perhaps the truest thing we can know is that the answer, like the line, might always be just beyond our reach. A face stares back at you. At first glance, it's just another face, human, familiar, detailed, but as your gaze lingers, something starts to shift. The features begin to warp, rearranging themselves in a strange and unsettling way. What once seemed solid becomes less real, almost inverted. This is the hollow mask illusion. It begins simply with a face that should be familiar, a face you trust, but when you turn the mask around, when the light hits it just right, the image flips. Suddenly the features that once pointed outward now point inward. What was once convex becomes concave. At first, the illusion is subtle. You might see the mask as it should be. The eyes, the nose, the mouth, they all seem to fit together in harmony. But your brain knows something is off. The features don't quite make sense. It's a face, but it's not. It's as if you are peering into something that shouldn't be. You trust your eyes, but they betray you. You want to see the face as it is, yet the inverted shape pulls you into a different understanding. The face is hollow, but your mind refuses to accept it. It insists that what you're seeing is real. And therein lies the trick. Your mind, wired to recognize faces, is fooled into seeing the mask as normal. But the more you look, the more the confusion deepens. The contours of the face seem familiar, too familiar, but they are reversed. The details no longer match the expectations built over years of seeing faces. How can this be? The face seems both solid and absent at once, as if it occupies two worlds. One, where it is a normal human face, and the other, where it is an empty mask with no depth. Your mind wants to make sense of this contradiction, but it can't. The more you try to resolve it, the less real it becomes. The illusion is a gentle whisper, inviting you to question reality itself. If this simple face can play such a trick on your senses, what else is hidden beneath the surface of what you think you know? How much of what we believe is a constructed reality, a mask we wear to fit the world's expectations? And then when you turn away, when you step back from the image, the face no longer seems so strange. The depth returns, the inversion fades, but the feeling lingers. You were sure you saw something different, and yet the mask was always the same. What does this tell us about perception, about our understanding of what is real? The hollow mask illusion challenges the very nature of what we see and how we interpret the world. It suggests that the surface, the outward appearance of things, can often deceive us. What looks normal may not be. What seems familiar may be something else entirely. We trust our eyes. They are our gateway to the world, the primary tool by which we navigate reality. But in this moment our eyes falter. They show us a face that isn't quite a face, a hollow mask that isn't quite empty. It's a reminder that perception is a delicate dance, one that can be easily thrown off balance. The more you focus, the more you try to make sense of the mask, the more you realize how fluid your reality is. If your mind can't even trust a simple face, then how can it be sure of anything else? The illusion shows that perception is not just passive observation, it's an active process, one that can be bent and shaped by the mind's own expectations. You are left wondering what else in your life is subject to the same trickery. What else, hidden in plain sight, is not what it seems. The hollow mask illusion opens a door to a deeper mystery, one that asks us to look beyond what we can see and question the world we think we know. And yet, in the end, the mask still looks the same. The face remains, but it's no longer quite the same as it was before. It's a subtle shift, a gentle reminder that reality, like the mask, is never as fixed as we think it is. What you see may never be what's really there. And that can be both unsettling and profound. As the mask settles back into its normal shape, the illusion fades. But the lesson stays with you. Nothing is ever truly as it seems. The hollow mask illusion teaches us that even the simplest things can hold the deepest secrets. And sometimes, the answers lie in the spaces between what we see and what we understand. There is a room that deceives, a place where dimensions twist, where distance loses all meaning. It's a room that seems ordinary, yet once you step inside, reality itself begins to warp. The Ames Room, an illusion that fools your eyes and your mind, bending space in ways you cannot see. At first, you look across the room, and it feels like any other room. It has walls, a floor, a ceiling, familiar, nothing out of the ordinary. But something is off. As you watch, a person moves from one corner to the other. At first, they seem normal. Then, as they cross the room, they grow larger and larger. The closer they get, the more unsettling it becomes. A person, just walking across the room, begins to grow in size. They seem to stretch, becoming impossibly large as they near you. The perspective should be impossible, but your eyes can't seem to process that. What is real, and what is illusion? At the far end of the room, another figure stands. They are much smaller than the first, though both appear to be standing in the same space. Yet your mind cannot make sense of it. How can two people, standing in the same room, appear to be so different in size? What does this mean for what you thought was real? The Ames Room is no ordinary space. It is a cleverly constructed room, shaped in a way that tricks your brain into misjudging perspective. The walls are not where they seem to be. The floor is not flat, the ceiling not level. Your eyes tell you one thing, but the room itself plays with the truth. You might be told the room is normal, but your experience inside it is anything but. As you look at the people moving across the floor, they shift sizes in ways that shouldn't happen. But this is the power of the Ames Room. It forces you to question the very fabric of space. The room is nothing like it appears. This is the nature of perception. What you think you know, what you feel sure of, can be completely undone by a simple trick. The Ames Room demonstrates how fragile our sense of reality is. We rely on the clues around us, the angles, the shapes, the distances to understand the world. But what if those clues are wrong? Think about how much of your reality is built on trust. You trust that the floor is level, that the walls are straight, that distance works the way you expect. But when you step into the Ames Room, those expectations crumble. The room, while appearing ordinary, upends everything you thought you knew about space and size. The real lesson of the Ames Room is this: perception is not the same as truth. Your eyes show you one thing, but the truth lies hidden beneath the surface. Just like the room itself, reality is not as fixed as it seems. It can be twisted, bent, and reshaped in ways that defy expectation. Every time you step inside, the same illusion happens. People grow and shrink before your eyes, and you are left to wonder how something so simple can feel so disorienting. The room itself doesn't change. It is your understanding of it that does. Your mind wrestles with the disconnect between what it sees and what it knows to be true. This dissonance between perception and reality reminds us how easily our minds can be tricked. The Ames Room forces us to acknowledge that what we see is not always what's true. The room, with its carefully designed angles, shows us how easily we can fall victim to our own assumptions about the world. And so we return to the question, how much of what we perceive is truly real? The Ames Room is not just a trick of sight, it is a demonstration of how the mind constructs the world. It shows us that what we see is not always a reflection of reality. It is a construct built on the foundations of perception, incomplete and often misleading. In the Ames Room, reality isn't about the space itself, but about the way our minds try to make sense of it. The room forces us to confront a deeper question: how much of what we think we know is simply a story our minds tell us, based on partial information. Step out of the room, and the world seems normal again. The illusion fades, but the lesson lingers. The Ames Room shows us how easy it is for our senses to deceive us, how our minds can be led astray by simple shapes and clever angles. What we see is not always what is. And as you leave the room behind, you might start to wonder how many other rooms are out there, spaces where perception bends and warps, where reality isn't what we think. How many parts of life are shaped by illusions, by things we cannot see but feel are true nonetheless? Just as the room changes its shape before your eyes, so too does the world around you shift when you are no longer looking. The Ames Room is a reminder that perception is never simple, never straightforward. Reality is always a dance between what we think and what truly exists, a delicate balance teetering on the edge of illusion. The scene shifts. A person walks through a doorway, passing from one room to another. You see it. The movement is subtle, but you know something has changed. Yet when you look again, nothing seems different. The details have slipped away unnoticed. The change was right before you, but you didn't see it. This is the essence of change blindness, an illusion that shows how easily we overlook the world around us. Your brain, trained to focus on what matters, misses the smaller shifts that happen without fanfare. The shift is imperceptible, but it is there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for your attention to fail. We tend to think of our perception as sharp, as though we notice every little detail, but change blindness reveals the truth. We are constantly missing things. The world moves, shifts, and alters itself, and yet we remain unaware. Our brains filter out what we don't need. But that doesn't mean those things aren't changing. Consider this: a person stands in front of you, talking, moving, engaging, but then without warning, they change their shirt or their posture shifts. The change is small, almost insignificant, yet when asked about it you'll realize only then that you didn't notice. Your attention, distracted by other details, simply missed the shift. This is a reminder of how much we rely on our attention to create our reality. Without it, the world becomes a blur, a stream of images that come and go. Change happens all around us, and yet we move through life as if the world stays still. Our minds don't notice everything. It's a process of filtering, choosing what matters, leaving the rest behind. Think about how often this happens in everyday life. You walk through a familiar place. The room looks the same, feels the same, but something is different. Something has shifted. A picture on the wall is in a new spot. A chair is moved, and you didn't see it happen. Your mind was too busy with other thoughts, with other priorities. This is change blindness at work. It's not a flaw, it's a survival mechanism. Our brains focus on the things that demand attention, the things that help us navigate the world. The rest fades into the background. The subtle changes that occur without notice are simply ignored, unimportant, until the moment you realize they were there all along. The paradox of change blindness is this: how can we trust what we see if we are missing so much? If our eyes can be deceived so easily, if we can overlook such large shifts in our surroundings, what does that say about the rest of our perception? How many changes in life, in the people around us, go unnoticed because our attention is elsewhere? This trickery of the mind is everywhere. You can watch a video where a person changes from one scene to the next, and still, your brain won't register the switch. The change is plain for the eyes, but the mind doesn't catch it. It's too busy processing other details. And that's the beauty and the danger of change blindness. It hides in the unnoticed. But why does it matter? What can we learn from these unnoticed moments? Perhaps it is a lesson in the fragility of our perception, that what we believe to be real is in fact full of gaps. Our brains build a version of the world, stitching it together from fragmented pieces, but the seams are invisible, and sometimes the world we create is not the world that exists. It's humbling to think about how much of life we miss. We are constantly walking through changes, through transitions, through subtle shifts that go unnoticed. The people we know are constantly changing, as are the places we visit. But unless we stop to pay attention, we might never realize how much has truly transformed. How many moments in life have passed by in a blur? How many times have you moved through a day, thinking everything was as it was, only to realize later that someone had changed. The mind plays tricks, filtering out the trivial, leaving only what it deems important, and in that process, it forgets to tell us what we're missing. Change blindness shows us how fragile our perception really is. We don't see the world as it is, we see the world we expect to see. And in that expectation, we blind ourselves to the deeper, more subtle truths. Life, like the moments of change we don't notice, slips by unnoticed, quietly altering itself as we move along. Think about how much of this applies to our interactions with others. The changes in the people we love, the shifts in our own lives, these transformations happen, quietly, like the subtle changes in the room you didn't see. We don't always notice them, but they are there, and the moment we realize this, we understand something crucial about perception itself. Your mind, in its wisdom, is both your guide and your deceiver. It helps you navigate, but it also blinds you to what might matter. Change blindness reminds us that the world we live in is not the world we see. It is far more complicated, far more layered than our eyes can comprehend. And so we move through the world, unaware of all the changes that happen just out of view. The subtle shifts, the quiet moments, the invisible transformations, they are happening all around us, waiting for us to pay attention. But the question is, when we do notice, will we see them for what they are? Or will they slip away once more, like everything else we missed before? You're walking through a busy street, people are moving past you, cars drive by, and the sounds of the world blend into the background. You feel like you're aware of everything around you, but then a person in a bright costume walks past. You didn't see them. How could you miss something so obvious? You were paying attention. You saw the crowd, heard the cars, felt the rhythm of the street, but somehow that one detail slipped by unnoticed. You were too focused on the bigger picture, too absorbed in the flow of your surroundings. And in that moment, you became blind to what was right in front of you. This is the nature of inattentional blindness. It's not that you didn't see the person, it's that your mind didn't allow you to. It was too busy focusing on something else, the task at hand, the people you were talking to, the cars speeding by. Your brain, ever practical, decided that the person in the bright costume wasn't important. The truth is, you cannot be aware of everything at once. Your brain, in its wisdom, chooses what to focus on. It filters out what it considers irrelevant. This is a survival mechanism, a way to keep you from becoming overwhelmed by the world. But in doing so, it hides things right before your eyes. Inattentional blindness is more common than you think. You might be looking at something, but not really seeing it. You might be so focused on one thing, on the task you are working on the conversation you're having, that the world around you fades into the background. You don't notice the changes. You don't see the unexpected details. Think of how often you drive down a familiar road. Your hands move, your feet press the pedals, but your mind is elsewhere. The world outside the window is a blur. You've driven this road 1,000 times. You don't need to notice the trees, the buildings, the people walking by. It all becomes part of the background. Then, one day something new appears, maybe a new store or a person in an unusual outfit, but you didn't see it the day before. How could you not have? You drove that same route yesterday, but in truth, you weren't looking. Your mind was elsewhere, preoccupied with thoughts, with worries, with the noise of the world. Our attention is finite. We can only focus on so much at once. In a world full of stimuli, our brains prioritize what's most relevant to our survival. We don't have the capacity to notice everything all the time. Our minds focus on what matters in the moment, and everything else is filtered out, even if it's right in front of us. The phenomenon of inattentional blindness reveals a deeper truth about the nature of perception. It shows that what we experience is not simply what we see. What we experience is shaped by what we choose to notice. And even when we think we're seeing it all, we're missing so much. How often do we live in the world this way? Thinking we know what's going on, thinking we see everything around us, but really only seeing a small slice of it. We believe our attention spans the full width of our experience, but the reality is far narrower. We miss details. We miss meaning. We miss moments, and yet this blindness is not a failure of the senses, it's a product of them. It's a trick of the mind, designed to keep us from becoming overwhelmed. It's a way to survive in a world full of distractions. Your brain is simply trying to make sense of everything, but the cost is that it leaves much of the world in the shadows. This is the silent force behind inattentional blindness, the fact that we cannot fully perceive the world around us because we are always focusing on something specific, whether we are in a crowd, or driving through a familiar neighborhood, or simply thinking about our day. We are only seeing part of the story. In a way, inattentional blindness is a paradox. We think we are aware of everything, that we are in control of what we see, but the truth is, we are blind to most of it. The more we try to focus, the more we miss, the more we think we know, the more we leave out. This insight into our perception reveals something important about the human experience. We are not passive observers of the world, we are active participants. We choose what to focus on, what to ignore, and in that choice we construct the world we live in. But what happens when we miss too much? What happens when we fail to notice what matters? Inattentional blindness isn't just about missing a person in a costume or a new store on the street. It's about how we move through life, always focused on our own internal world, missing the changes, the details, the moments that happen just beyond our line of sight. But the deeper question is, what would happen if we stopped filtering so much out? If we began to pay attention to everything, even the things we consider irrelevant? What if we allowed ourselves to see all the details, not just the ones we think matter? We could be overwhelmed. We might see too much. We might find ourselves lost in the sheer volume of what's out there. But we might also discover something unexpected, something meaningful in the details we've been ignoring. We might find that the world we think we know is far richer, far deeper than we ever imagined. There is a moment when sound and sight collide, when the mind is asked to make sense of two conflicting signals. You watch a person speak, their lips moving in a familiar pattern, yet the sound that reaches your ears is something entirely different. Your brain, ever the problem solver, tries to reconcile the mismatch. This is the McGurk Effect, a curious phenomenon where what you hear is altered by what you see. You might hear one sound, but if the speaker's lips form a different shape, your brain will blend the two, giving you a completely new sound, one that isn't even part of the original speech. At first you might think it's an error. After all, your ears and eyes are telling you different things. But this is not a mistake. This is how our senses work together, trying to create a coherent picture of the world. The result is a new perception, something that doesn't exist in the real world, but in the space where your mind meets your senses. Your brain is constantly processing the world around you, gathering information from all angles. It's not content to simply hear a sound or see a movement. It wants to combine the two, to find a way to make sense of everything. But in doing so, it sometimes creates something unexpected. Imagine the sound of someone saying "ba," but their lips are shaped as though they are saying "fei." What happens? Your brain blends the visual and auditory cues and creates a new sound altogether, something that neither "ba" nor a "fei" would be on its own. This blending can be so convincing that you may hear the new sound as though it were real, even though it doesn't exist in the physical world. The McGurk Effect is a reminder of how much our perception is a construct. We don't simply passively receive information, we interpret it, combine it, reshape it into something we can understand. This blending of senses is a feature of the mind, not a flaw. It's how we navigate a complex world, but it also shows how easily our senses can be tricked. This effect also reveals how deeply our senses are intertwined. We think of hearing and seeing as separate experiences, but in truth, they are constantly influencing each other. The McGurk Effect shows that when one sense gives us conflicting information, our brain will merge them into something new, something that feels real. It's not about one sense being right or wrong, it's about how the mind handles the collision. What does this mean for our understanding of reality? If our senses can be so easily manipulated, how much of what we experience is truly real? The McGurk effect isn't just a trick, it's a clue to how our brains work. We don't just observe the world, we actively construct it, and sometimes we create illusions. Think about it, we often assume that what we see and hear is an accurate reflection of the world. But in the case of the McGurk effect, our senses are creating something that isn't there. The sound you think you hear doesn't match the physical reality of the speaker's lips, and yet you are convinced by it. What else in our perception might be similarly distorted? This is the delicate dance of perception. It is a process, a blending of input from different senses, all working together to create a coherent understanding of the world. But sometimes, that process produces something unexpected, something that doesn't reflect the outside world at all. The McGurk effect is a powerful reminder that perception is not a direct line to reality. It is instead a complex interpretation, full of gaps and assumptions. Consider how much of life is built on our senses working together. You rely on your ears and eyes to help you understand everything from speech to surroundings, from danger to comfort. But when those senses contradict each other, when they send mixed signals, how does your brain decide what is true? The McGurk effect shows us that it doesn't always get it right, but it always tries to make sense of the noise. The fascinating part of the McGurk effect is how it reveals the flexibility of perception. You might think your senses are fixed, reliable, steadfast, but in truth, they are malleable, shaped by context and experience. When the brain faces conflicting sensory input, it doesn't struggle. Instead, it finds a new path, a new version of reality. This blending of senses is something we take for granted. We don't often think about how much our senses influence each other. But when something as simple as sound and sight can merge into something entirely new, it forces us to reconsider how we experience the world. What if everything we perceive is in part a combination of the senses, mixed together into something that feels real but isn't? What happens when we misunderstand something as simple as a sound or a face? If the brain can't even trust the merging of senses in moments like these, what else might be slipping through the cracks? The McGurk effect, like so many perceptual tricks, asks us to question the nature of what we know and how we know it. Each time the McGurk effect occurs, it forces us to confront the question, how much of what we experience is real? The sound is a creation of our minds, shaped by the way we see the world. It is no longer just about the objective reality of the sound. It is about how we as perceivers interact with it. We experience the world not just with our senses but through them. We are constantly blending, adjusting and adapting our perception. And the McGurk effect is a small window into that process, showing us how easily our minds can bend and reshape the world in ways we never notice. It leaves us with a quiet, unsettling thought. If our senses can deceive us so easily in such a simple way, what else might they be hiding? What truths about the world are we missing because our brains are busy crafting their own version of it? The McGurk effect doesn't just change the sound we hear, it changes the way we think about perception itself. Imagine closing your eyes, but not to sleep. Instead, you sit in a room, surrounded by nothing. The light is dim, the air still. Everything is uniform, too uniform. Your vision is reduced to an endless expanse of gray. Your senses are stripped of their usual complexity, leaving you in a quiet, empty world. This is the Ganzfeld effect. It's a sensory deprivation experience designed to overwhelm the mind by removing all the usual cues. In a space like this, your brain begins to search for meaning in the nothingness. It creates patterns where none exist, filling the void with images, thoughts, and sensations that weren't there before. At first, you might feel relaxed, at ease, as though you've simply drifted into a peaceful silence. But as time passes, something begins to shift. The quiet becomes oppressive, the grayness overwhelming. Your brain, desperate for stimulation, starts to generate its own reality. The longer you stay in this world of emptiness, the more vivid your inner world becomes. You might start to see things, faint flashes of light, or shapes in the periphery of your vision. You might hear whispers, sounds that seem to come from nowhere. The longer you stay, the more intense these sensations become. Your mind, unmoored from its usual anchors, starts to weave a reality out of the barest threads. This is what happens when your senses are deprived of the usual input. With no clear images or sounds to focus on, your brain begins to make them up. The Ganzfeld effect is a reminder of how our perception works. It doesn't passively receive reality. It actively constructs it, pulling from memories, expectations, and imagination to fill the gaps. What's fascinating is that these hallucinations are not random. They are shaped by your mind's need for patterns. The Ganzfeld effect is not just a trick of the senses, it's a deep dive into how we create the world around us. In the absence of stimuli, the mind takes control, crafting experiences from its own internal data. You may not realize it, but this effect is constantly at play in your life. Every day your mind fills in gaps, completing the picture with assumptions, expectations, and memories. When you look at a face, your mind doesn't just see the face, it fills in details, interprets emotions, and creates a story based on past experience. The Ganzfeld effect amplifies this process. It takes away the usual clarity and leaves only the mind's raw, unfiltered creativity. With nothing else to focus on, your brain begins to paint its own picture of reality. The result is a world that feels real, even though it's entirely a product of your imagination. What does this say about the nature of reality? If the brain can create such vivid experiences from nothing, how much of what we perceive is really out there in the world, and how much is just a creation of our minds? The Ganzfeld effect is a clue, a subtle reminder that reality might not be as solid as we think. In this altered state, the boundaries between perception and imagination blur. What you think you see, what you feel, becomes a fluid mixture of both external reality and internal creation. The world you experience is not just shaped by your senses, but by your mind's ongoing effort to make sense of it all. This illusion of reality is at the heart of the Ganzfeld effect. It shows that what we experience is never purely objective. Our perception of the world is always influenced by our minds, our expectations, and our past. What we think of as real is actually a complex, constantly shifting creation, built from countless influences. When you emerge from the Ganzfeld, the world around you feels clearer, more vivid, and more solid. But what's really changed? Your senses are the same, yet your mind has undergone a shift. It has learned how quickly it can fill the emptiness with its own creations, how easily reality can be shaped by the lack of input. This idea isn't limited to experiments in sensory deprivation. It happens in everyday life too. Every time you misread a facial expression, or assume you know what someone is thinking, you're experiencing a form of the Ganzfeld effect. Your mind fills in the gaps with its own interpretation, creating a reality that might not be true. The Ganzfeld effect pushes us to question the reliability of our senses. If our minds can create an entire world of sensations out of nothing, what else might they be fabricating? How much of what we see, hear, and feel is simply a product of our minds, shaped by our expectations and our histories? In many ways, the Ganzfeld effect is a meditation on the power of the mind. It reveals how we are constantly shaping our perception of reality, not just observing it. Our brains don't passively receive information. They actively construct the world around us, filling in the gaps, making meaning, and creating a sense of coherence from the raw data of experience. It also highlights the vulnerability of our perception. When stripped of the usual sensory input, our minds can be overwhelmed. What feels like reality can quickly dissolve into hallucination, leaving us unsure of what's truly there. The Ganzfeld effect shows how easily our grip on reality can slip, how fragile our understanding of the world really is. And so the experience fades, and you return to a world that feels real and solid. But the question lingers: what is reality, really? If our minds can create a world from nothing, how much of the world we know is truly out there, and how much is just a story our brains are telling us? The Ganzfeld effect may leave us with more questions than answers, but it opens the door to a deeper understanding of perception itself. You focus on a small dot in the center of your vision. It's simple, a tiny detail against a neutral background. At first, everything is clear. The edges of the dot are sharp. It's present, real. But as you continue to stare, something strange begins to happen. The surrounding world starts to fade. Gradually, the details around the dot vanish. The shapes, the colors, the patterns, they dissolve into nothing. At first, it's subtle, almost imperceptible. You might even think it's your eyes playing tricks on you. But no, the surrounding world is truly fading. It's slipping away, as though it never existed at all. This is the Troxler fading effect. It's a curious optical illusion that shows how easily our perception can be manipulated. When you fixate on one point for long enough, the rest of your surroundings begin to fade into the background, almost as if they were never there. Your mind simply stops processing them. The key here is focus. As you stare at the central dot, your brain begins to ignore everything else. The edges of your vision no longer demand attention. The details around you become less relevant, and your mind, in its effort to simplify, starts to remove them from your conscious awareness. What's fascinating is that the fading doesn't happen all at once. It's a gradual process, a slow unraveling of the world. The longer you focus, the more you lose sight of what's around you. And yet, if you shift your gaze, the world snaps back into place. Everything that faded comes rushing back, as though it were waiting for you to notice it again. This simple illusion reveals something profound about how we perceive the world. It shows us that what we see is not always a reflection of what's actually out there. Our minds filter out what it deems unnecessary, leaving us with only the parts of the world that are deemed important in the moment. It's easy to think that we see the world as it is, clear, fixed, and unchanging. But the Troxler fading effect challenges that idea. It suggests that perception is not as solid as we assume. What we see is influenced by what we choose to focus on, and in doing so we might miss the bigger picture. The mind is constantly deciding what deserves attention. When you focus on one thing, everything else fades into the background. But what happens to those details? Are they really gone, or are they still there, waiting for us to notice them again? The Troxler fading effect raises a question about the reliability of our senses and how much of the world we're actually missing. This is a lesson in selective attention. We can only focus on so much at once, and as a result, our perception narrows. The world becomes a collection of key points, and everything else falls away. It's a necessary process, one that helps us navigate the overwhelming amount of information our senses take in every day. But what happens when we forget to see the things that fade into the background? How much of the world is lost to us when we're too focused on one point? The Troxler fading effect is a reminder that the reality we perceive is only part of the full picture. There is always more that we're not seeing. In everyday life, we rarely pay attention to everything around us. We focus on specific details, on things that demand our attention, while the rest of the world blurs into the background. This is a normal part of how our minds work. We can't process everything at once, so we choose what to focus on, and the rest fades away. But what if those fading details are more important than we realize? What if by focusing too much on one thing, we miss out on the hidden truths of the world around us? The Troxler fading effect shows that we might be walking through life, seeing only fragments of reality, unaware of the full picture that exists just outside our focus. When you experience the Troxler fading effect, it's easy to feel disoriented. It's as though the world you thought was solid and constant is suddenly slipping away. But this feeling isn't a mistake. It's a glimpse into how fragile our perception truly is, how easily the mind can shape the world into something less than it is. The world you see is a construct, built from the bits of information your brain deems important. The Troxler fading effect forces us to question how much of our perception is real, and how much is simply the result of our mind's filtering process. What if we're only seeing a small part of the world, and the rest is simply waiting for us to notice? This effect also raises a deeper question about attention and presence. How often do we walk through life with our focus locked on a single point, missing the richness of the world around us? The Troxler fading effect shows us how easy it is to become so fixated on one thing that we lose sight of everything else. The next time you walk through the world, consider how much of it might be slipping away without you even realizing. How many details are fading into the background, waiting for you to shift your focus and bring them back into view? The Troxler fading effect isn't just a curiosity, it's a window into how we experience reality itself. It's easy to believe that what we see is all there is. But the Troxler fading effect reminds us that our perception is far more fragile than we think. What fades from view isn't necessarily gone, it's just waiting for our attention to shift, to bring it back into focus. And that's the real mystery of perception, what's hidden from our view, waiting for us to see it again. There's a face before you, it's familiar, maybe even comforting, yet something about it feels off. You study it, noticing all the usual features, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, but as your gaze shifts, something unsettling happens. The face begins to twist in a way that defies logic, and you can't quite put your finger on it. This is the Thatcher Effect, an optical illusion that plays with your brain's ability to process faces. At first, the face seems fine, but when you flip it upside down, everything becomes distorted. What once felt normal, what your brain instinctively recognized as human, suddenly becomes a twisted, uncanny version of itself. When you look at the face right side up, your mind processes it effortlessly. Faces are a key part of how we interact with the world. We recognize them instantly, reading emotions, intent, and identity all at once. But flip that face upside down, and the rules change. Your brain stumbles, unable to make sense of the flipped features. This twist, the inversion of the face, disturbs your brain in ways that are hard to explain. The face seems wrong, but you can't figure out why. It's as though something essential has been turned on its head, leaving only the surface behind. The eyes, nose, and mouth are all there, but they no longer belong. The illusion plays on your brain's expectations. What's remarkable is that we don't notice this when the face is upright. Our brains have evolved to recognize faces almost instantly. We are wired to identify human features, to respond to them, to see them as whole, consistent, and understandable. But the moment the face is turned upside down, those features stop fitting together in the way we expect. The Thatcher Effect isn't just a simple trick, it's a reflection of how we perceive the world. We process faces in a special way, relying on our ability to read their subtle cues. But when the face is altered, even slightly, it becomes foreign. The illusion shows us how much our minds depend on context to interpret what we see. Your brain is so accustomed to seeing faces right side up that it doesn't process the individual features in the same way when the face is flipped. The distortions, eyes rotated, mouth turned, become less obvious. The whole face feels wrong, but it's difficult to pinpoint why. It's as though the world shifts beneath you and you can't grasp the change. This experience opens a window into how we interact with the world. We often take for granted the way we process things. We assume we see them clearly, that we understand them as they are. But the Thatcher Effect demonstrates how easily our perception can be tricked, how quickly our brains can misinterpret what is right before our eyes. Faces are our windows to understanding others. They are how we connect with each other, how we gauge emotion, trust, and intention. But when that connection is disrupted, when the face no longer behaves as expected, it becomes a puzzle, a source of confusion. This illusion teaches us that perception is not as solid as we might think, and it's not just about faces. The Thatcher Effect shows us how context shapes everything we see. What we expect from the world, from the people around us, influences how we perceive it. When something shifts, no matter how small, the whole picture can fall apart. Our brains are constantly adjusting to make sense of these changes, but sometimes that process fails. This illusion highlights the delicate balance our minds maintain between recognition and confusion. Faces, though familiar, can turn alien with a simple shift. The Thatcher Effect asks us to consider how much of what we see is shaped by what we expect, and how easily those expectations can be upended. It's a humbling reminder that our minds are not always as reliable as we think. The way we process faces, the way we navigate the world, is built on patterns, on expectations. But when those patterns are disrupted, the world becomes harder to understand. What we thought was clear, solid, and familiar begins to feel uncertain. And yet there's a certain beauty in this uncertainty. The Thatcher effect doesn't just expose a flaw in perception, it reveals the complexity of how we see the world. It shows that what we think we know might not be the whole story. Our brains work tirelessly to make sense of everything around us, but sometimes they get it wrong. This illusion isn't just about faces, though. It's about the way we see everything. It's a metaphor for how we perceive the world as a whole, how much of it is shaped by our expectations, and how easily those expectations can lead us astray. The world isn't always as it seems, and the Thatcher effect serves as a reminder of how little we truly understand. It's as if the world around us is constantly shifting, adjusting, presenting itself in ways that are sometimes difficult to grasp. The faces we encounter, the people we meet, the things we see, they are not always as straightforward as we think. The Thatcher effect shows us that perception is a fluid, ever-changing process, and in that fluidity, there's a lesson. What we see isn't always the truth. Our brains are constantly interpreting, adjusting, and reinterpreting the world around us. The Thatcher effect isn't just an illusion, it's a glimpse into how fragile our sense of reality really is. And as we move through the world, we might want to remember that what we think we see may not be the whole picture after all. You're staring at a still image, an arrangement of dots scattered against a calm background. Nothing too unusual, but then something begins to shift. You focus on one dot, and as your gaze locks onto it, everything else seems to vanish, slipping from your awareness without a trace. This is motion-induced blindness, a strange illusion where moving objects disappear from your sight, even though they're right there. You might notice the shifting, swirling dots, moving slowly, rhythmically, but when you focus on one, everything else around it seems to fade, as if your mind has decided to ignore the moving dots, making them vanish. The phenomenon is subtle. You're not closing your eyes, you're not looking away. The motion is still happening, but your brain doesn't register it. It's as if the mind, overwhelmed by the movement, decides to focus on only one point, blocking out everything else. This illusion shows how fragile our perception truly is. We expect to see the whole picture, to absorb everything in our field of vision. But sometimes, our brains can only handle so much, and they discard information, leaving parts of the world unseen. The moving objects don't disappear. They're simply hidden from view. In some ways, this mirrors our experience of life. We move through the world, constantly shifting our attention, focusing on one thing, while letting everything else blur into the background. Our minds are constantly filtering, deciding what is worth noticing and what can be ignored. Motion-induced blindness is just a reminder of how selective our attention really is. The illusion works because our brains are wired to prioritize the most important information. We're trained to focus on a single target, like a person talking to us, a book we're reading, or the path ahead. But in doing so, we ignore everything else around us, and this can have strange consequences. Our brains don't notice everything. We can miss things right in front of us, just like we miss the moving dots, and that's the unsettling part of motion-induced blindness. It's not about what's absent, but about what we fail to see. We think we're paying attention. We think we're noticing everything that matters. But in truth, our minds are always editing the world, leaving parts of it out, hiding things from view. If you're caught in the middle of this illusion, it feels as though the world is slipping away from you. But that's not what's happening. It's not disappearing. It's just being hidden, erased from your awareness. The moving dots are still there. They just aren't being processed in the same way. This isn't a visual flaw. It's how the brain prioritizes. In everyday life, motion-induced blindness might show up when you're driving. You focus on the road, on the task of navigating, and everything else blurs into the background. It might be a person walking across the street, a sign that's barely visible in your peripheral vision, or a car approaching in the distance. But your mind, focused on the task, ignores it all. The motion seems invisible. This blindness to motion serves a purpose. It helps us focus. Our brains are constantly filtering information, deciding what's important and what's not. But in doing so, they make the world smaller, more manageable, and sometimes less complete. The world around us is full of motion, full of details, but how much of it do we truly see? It's a reminder of how much our reality is constructed. We don't simply observe the world, we shape it through our attention, our focus, our priorities. What's visible, what's real, is as much about what we choose to notice as it is about what is actually there. And in the act of focusing, we lose the richness of the bigger picture. Motion-induced blindness highlights how easily the mind can be tricked, how our perception of the world can slip away. We are not passive observers. We shape our experience through our attention, but that attention comes with limits. What happens when we miss too much? How many important moments slip away when we're not paying attention? But this illusion also shows how the brain adapts, how it can block out unnecessary stimuli, focusing only on the details it thinks are important. It's not a flaw in the system, it's a survival mechanism, a way to filter the overwhelming amount of information that bombards us every day. But what happens when we become too good at ignoring? When the world, in all its motion and chaos, fades from view, it's tempting to think that the world is fixed, solid, clear. But motion-induced blindness shows us that perception is fluid, constantly shifting. The world is in motion, and so is our awareness of it. What we see, what we notice, is a reflection of our focus, and sometimes that focus leaves parts of reality in the shadows. The more we study illusions like this one, the more we see how fragile our understanding of reality truly is. We believe we see the whole world, but in truth we only see parts of it. Our brains are constantly selecting, editing, deciding what's worth noticing and what's not. And sometimes, the motion we don't see is the motion that matters most. In some ways, motion-induced blindness is an invitation to slow down, to step back and consider the parts of the world we're ignoring. What are we missing when we focus too closely on one thing? What might be slipping away, just outside our attention, as we race through the world? It's easy to think that what we see is all that matters. But motion-induced blindness forces us to confront the idea that perception is more complex than we realize. The world around us is full of motion, full of life, full of details, but how much of it do we truly see? The answer might be more surprising than we think. So, as you move through your day, consider this: how much of the world is hidden from you, just out of view, waiting for you to shift your focus and notice it again. Motion-induced blindness isn't just about missing dots on a screen. It's a reminder that the world we see is just one version of reality, and we might be missing the rest. You see it, two flashes of light, quick and sharp, appearing one after the other. Your eyes catch them, blink, and they're gone. The first seems real. The second feels as if it belongs, but then something strange happens. The flashes blur together, combining into something that shouldn't be. This is the double flash illusion, a trick your mind plays on you. Two distinct flashes, separated in time, are perceived as one. They merge into a single continuous moment, as though the second flash was simply an extension of the first. But the truth is, they were separate, distinct. Your brain, however, can't quite process that. At first, you might think you've just imagined it. Perhaps the flashes were too quick to be grasped fully, and you're left wondering whether your eyes were deceiving you. But when you repeat the experience, it happens again. The second flash isn't just a separate event, it's merged, blending into the first like they were always together. Why does this happen? The double flash illusion shows us something fascinating about perception. It isn't always about what we actually see, but about how our brain makes sense of what it sees. Your brain doesn't just passively record flashes of light, it interprets them, creating a cohesive narrative, even when the pieces don't quite fit together. This illusion is a reminder of how actively our minds work. When we witness events, we don't just absorb them as they are. We combine them, draw connections, and fill in the blanks. In the case of the double flash illusion, your mind is so eager to create a smooth, continuous experience that it decides the two flashes belong together, even when they don't. The flashes aren't identical, they happen at different moments, spaced apart. But your mind doesn't care about the details. It seeks patterns, meaning, and consistency. It wants the flashes to belong, to create a flow, and so it blends them into one, a single event where there were two. What does this say about our understanding of reality? It shows that what we perceive is often a product of our mind's construction. Reality isn't always as solid as we think. Our minds actively shape our experiences, making the world feel continuous, even when the pieces don't quite fit. The double flash illusion is a perfect example of this. The trick is in the timing. Your mind has learned to group events that happen in close succession. It links them together, smoothing out the edges to create a seamless experience. The two flashes, separated only by a fraction of time, are interpreted as one. The gaps, the differences, are erased. But what happens when your mind gets it wrong? What happens when the timing isn't quite right, or when events are just too different to merge? The world starts to feel less predictable, less cohesive. The double flash illusion, in its subtle way, shows us that our perception of time and space isn't as certain as we might like to believe. We rely on our senses to tell us what's happening in the world. But sometimes, those senses fail us, blending moments together, or distorting events in ways we can't fully explain. The double flash illusion is a reminder that our perception of reality is not fixed. It is fluid, shaped by the mind's need to make sense of the world. The illusion happens in the blink of an eye. A quick flash, a second, and suddenly, two separate moments become one. This rapid blending of experience challenges our understanding of time, of continuity, and of reality itself. The world is constantly shifting around us, and sometimes the mind can't quite keep up with the flow. Consider how often this happens in everyday life. We move through the world, experiencing moments that blend together. Conversations merge into one long stream of words. Events overlap, and the past and present sometimes feel like they're happening at the same time. The double flash illusion is a small visual example of something much larger, a reminder of how time and experience can be fluid. This trickery of the mind forces us to think differently about perception. How much of what we experience is a smooth, continuous narrative, and how much is an illusion created by our brain? The double flash illusion isn't just about two flashes of light. It's a reflection of how our minds build the world, shaping it into something we think we understand. When you experience the double flash illusion, it feels as if the world has been stitched together, the gaps filled by your mind's creativity. This is how perception works. It doesn't just show us what is, it builds an experience, and sometimes in the process of stitching the world together, things get lost, merged, or distorted. In life, we often look for connections, for patterns that explain the chaos around us. Our minds crave continuity, understanding, but as the double flash illusion shows us, that need for coherence can sometimes create a reality that doesn't quite match what's really there. Our experience of the world is shaped by the mind's own filters. The more we understand how our brains create these illusions, the more we realize how much of reality is not a direct reflection of the world, but a construction of our mind. The double flash illusion is a small glimpse into this process, a reminder that the way we perceive time, space, and events is often shaped more by our expectations than by what is actually happening around us. When you see the flashes blend into one, it's easy to be fooled into thinking that's how things always are, that reality is smooth, continuous, and seamless. But the truth is more complicated. Reality is made up of moments, fragments, events, and experiences. And sometimes our minds blur them together, creating a version of the world that's easier to understand, but not always true. In the space between those two flashes, your mind has already filled in the gaps, smoothing out the transition. The world in all its complexity is condensed into something simpler, easier to comprehend, and in that simplification, we lose the full richness of experience, the layers of reality that exist just outside our awareness. The double flash illusion is not just an optical trick, it's a window into how we process the world. It shows us that perception is not passive, it is an active process, a constant creation of reality, piecing together the moments and flashes that make up our experience. And sometimes, in that creation, we miss the truth. You're standing in a room, looking at a colorful object, perhaps a red apple or a blue vase. The colors are bright, vibrant, alive. But then you step outside, into the changing light of the day, and suddenly, those same colors don't look quite the same. It's as if the object has transformed right before your eyes, though it hasn't moved. The apple, once a rich red, now seems a bit dull, perhaps even orange. The blue vase you once admired seems to fade, its hue less intense. This is color constancy, and it's a trick your brain plays on you. Color constancy is the process that allows us to see familiar colors in changing light. It's a vital feature of our perception. The brain compensates for varying lighting conditions, adjusting how we see objects so that their colors remain consistent. But sometimes, this process fails, and that's when things get interesting. When color constancy fails, we see a distorted version of reality. The colors around us no longer match what we expect, and the world begins to shift. What we think is a familiar shade, like red or blue, becomes something new, something that doesn't quite fit the picture we have in our minds. This failure happens when our brain cannot properly compensate for the lighting around us. The brain relies on surrounding cues, like shadows or light sources, to adjust our perception of color. When these cues are misleading, our brain makes mistakes, and the colors we see are off. The red apple isn't red anymore, it's something else entirely. Imagine walking into a room with fluorescent lights. You know those lights cast a cold, bluish hue over everything. And yet your mind compensates, adjusting the color of the objects in the room to look like they would under sunlight. But when the lighting is tricky, the colors begin to look strange. What was once familiar turns foreign. This isn't a fault in our vision. In fact, it's an extraordinary feat of the brain. Color constancy is a way our mind tries to maintain stability in a constantly shifting world. But sometimes, when the conditions are just right, the brain gets it wrong, and we see colors that are far from what we know they should be. When you witness this, it feels a little unsettling. What you see doesn't quite match what you know. The apple isn't just red, it's not even an apple anymore. It's as if the world around you is losing its clarity, slipping into an alternate version of reality, where nothing is as it should be. This is a powerful reminder that what we see is not always what is. The brain fills in the gaps, using past experiences, light cues and assumptions to create a version of reality that feels stable, even when it's not. It's a subtle dance between perception and reality, one that we rarely notice until it breaks down. These moments force us to question what we take for granted. How much of what we see is truly the way it is? Color constancy failures show us that what we perceive is often a construct, shaped by our brain's efforts to make sense of the world. What we think is real is often a compromise between what's actually out there and what the brain believes is out there. The next time you see an object in different lighting, notice how its color shifts. It may seem strange, disorienting, but it's part of how our brains maintain consistency. The world isn't always as it appears, but our minds work hard to make it seem like it is. Color constancy is the illusion that helps us navigate the world without constantly second-guessing what we see. But when the brain's correction process fails, we are left with a distorted version of reality. The world we know suddenly becomes unfamiliar. What seemed like a red apple now appears orange or brown. The rich blue of the vase has turned into a washed-out shade. The things we once took for granted feel less certain. This teaches us a valuable lesson about perception. It's not as reliable as we often think. The colors we see are not direct reflections of the world. They are shaped by the brain's attempt to make sense of the sensory data it receives. What we see as reality is in many ways an illusion carefully constructed by our minds. It's a humbling thought. We live in a world built on assumptions, on brain-powered shortcuts that help us navigate life's complexities. We don't see the world as it is, we see it as our minds want us to see it. And sometimes that means we miss the truth in favor of something more stable, more familiar. But when color constancy fails, the world reminds us of this fragility. The world shifts and warps in unexpected ways, and we are left to navigate this altered reality. Our brains are constantly adapting, constantly working to maintain a sense of normalcy. But sometimes those efforts fail, leaving us with something strange, something unfamiliar. In the midst of these moments, there's beauty. These failures in color constancy reveal the complexity of perception, the layers of interpretation that our brains layer on top of the world. Reality is not a simple static thing. It is something that our minds continuously shape, constantly shifting based on light, context, and experience. So the next time you find yourself looking at a color that doesn't seem quite right, take a moment to reflect on the way your brain is working. The world may be changing in subtle ways, but it's your mind that is shaping the experience, compensating for light, shadows, and the many things you don't consciously notice. The world you see is only one version of reality, crafted by the very mind that perceives it. Imagine losing a part of yourself. A limb, maybe, something you've known for years. You can no longer feel it, but the sensation of it is still there. A phantom, lingering in the space where it once was. Your brain insists that it's there, even when it's not. This is the phantom limb phenomenon. It happens to those who have lost a limb, a part of their body that no longer exists. But even after the limb is gone, the brain continues to send signals to that space, creating sensations, tingling, itching, even pain. It's as if the limb is still there, despite all evidence to the contrary. The feeling of the missing limb can be so vivid that the person affected may even try to move it, as if it were still attached. They may experience it as real, as tangible, even though their body knows it no longer exists. The brain, in its effort to make sense of the world, simply cannot let go of the idea that the limb is still part of them. What's most fascinating is how the brain interprets these sensations. The nerves in the stump still send signals to the brain, and the brain, in turn, tries to make sense of them. But since the limb is gone, it's forced to create these phantom sensations, fabricating an experience that feels as real as anything else. The phantom limb phenomenon is not just about loss, it's about the persistence of memory. The brain is holding on to an image of the body that no longer fits reality. It's as if a piece of your identity has been removed, but your mind hasn't caught up yet, leaving the phantom presence lingering in its wake. This illusion is a reminder of how the brain constructs our sense of self. Our understanding of who we are, where our body begins and ends, is shaped by countless signals, by sensory input that tells us where we are in space. But when a part of that body is lost, the brain doesn't always know how to adjust, and yet it does its best. The phantom limb sensation isn't just random, it's a product of the brain's attempts to maintain continuity. The brain fights against the sudden absence, holding on to the image of the limb as if it were still there, filling the void with a version of reality that isn't grounded in physical truth. This idea of the mind creating reality is both fascinating and unsettling. If the brain can create sensations so real, so vivid, for something that isn't even there, what else in our experience is similarly constructed? How much of what we perceive is shaped not by what exists, but by what our brains expect to be there? The mind's ability to create these phantom sensations suggests that perception is not as fixed as we might think. The body, the self, the world around us, everything is in constant flux, shaped by the brain's interpretations. The phantom limb is an example of the mind's attempt to hold on to the familiar, even when reality has changed. The question of what is real becomes blurred. The brain has no problem imagining the presence of something that no longer exists. it has the power to fill in the gaps, to create an experience based on memory, expectation, and need. The phantom limb is a tangible example of how perception doesn't always match reality. For those experiencing it, the sensation can be both disorienting and haunting. The phantom limb may feel like an extension of the self, a part of them that still exists, even when it doesn't. It's a strange and subtle reminder that identity, like perception, is not a static thing. It is constantly in flux, shaped by the mind's efforts to make sense of the world. The sensation of the missing limb is not just about touch or movement, it can be emotional as well. For some, the phantom sensations can be accompanied by a sense of loss, grief, or longing. The mind is not only trying to recreate the physical experience, but also the emotional attachment to the body. When you think about it, the phantom limb is not just a trick of the senses, it's a reflection of the mind's deep need for continuity, for wholeness. The body is not simply a collection of parts, it is a dynamic, integrated experience, one that the mind works tirelessly to maintain, even when the body changes. This phenomenon also points to the power of memory. The brain holds on to the memory of the limb, refusing to let go. Even in the face of physical evidence, the mind insists that the missing part of the body is still there, still real. It's a testament to how much of our reality is shaped by memory and expectation. And so the phantom limb persists. The brain, ever determined to make sense of the world, continues to create sensations that tie the missing limb to the body. The illusion may fade over time, but for many the phantom remains, a reminder of the mind's power to create, even in the absence of the physical. The phantom limb phenomenon challenges our understanding of the body and the self. It asks us to consider how much of who we are is tied to our physical form, and how much of it is shaped by the mind. If the mind can create sensations of a lost limb, what else might it create for us? When we look at the world around us, we assume what we see is what's truly there, but the mind, as we've seen with the phantom limb, doesn't always work that way. Our perception is shaped by memory, expectation, and the constant drive to make sense of the world. The phantom limb is just one example of how reality is more fluid than we might think. What's truly remarkable is how the brain can hold on to a version of the world that no longer exists, creating a reality that feels real, even when it isn't. The phantom limb is a subtle, yet profound example of how perception and reality can become disconnected, leaving us with an experience that defies logic. There is a ball moving in front of you, floating in space. It's smooth, round, and seems to glide from one side to the other, effortlessly. But as you watch, something strange happens. The ball seems to drift not just across the space, but also in depth, as if it's moving both sideways and towards or away from you. This is the Pulfrich Effect, an optical illusion that shows how the brain interprets motion. Normally, we see things move in a straight line, from point A to point B. But with the Pulfrich Effect, the brain is tricked into perceiving motion that isn't there, creating a sense of depth where none exists. The trick is simple. The brain processes information from both eyes at different speeds. If one eye is slightly delayed by something as simple as wearing sunglasses, motion seems to take on a strange depth. The ball doesn't just move side to side, it appears to move in an arc, creating the illusion of 3D motion, even though it's just a 2D movement across your field of vision. At first, it might seem like a mistake, a trick of the light, but as you focus, the illusion deepens. The ball seems to shift position more dramatically, jumping in and out of space. What was once a simple line of motion has become a complex, depth-filled experience. The depth you see is not real, but it feels real nonetheless. What's happening is that the brain relies on visual input from both eyes to gauge depth and distance. Under normal circumstances, both eyes work together seamlessly. But when one eye is delayed, the brain compensates by creating the illusion of depth, as though it's trying to make sense of the incomplete information it's receiving. The Pulfrich Effect reveals something profound about perception. We often assume our senses are working perfectly in sync, that what we see is exactly what is there, but the truth is far more fluid. Our brain is constantly interpreting and filling in gaps, creating a version of the world that may not reflect reality, but feels true all the same. Imagine this effect happening in real life. You're walking down a street and a car approaches. But instead of seeing it as a simple two-dimensional object moving toward you, the car seems to drift in and out of your space. It seems to appear closer and further away with each movement, shifting in ways that don't align with the way the world actually works. The Pulfrich Effect is a reminder that our brains are not passive receivers of information. They are active creators, constantly building a picture of the world based on fragmented data. What we see is not simply what's in front of us, it's a constructed version of reality, pieced together by the brain's interpretations. What's particularly fascinating about the Pulfrich Effect is how subtle it is. At first, the effect may not be obvious. It takes only a small change in the speed at which the brain processes information from each eye, and suddenly, our perception of depth is warped. The slightest shift in the balance of information can create a whole new experience. This illusion also teaches us about the nature of depth itself. We tend to think of depth as something that's solid, a true reflection of how things exist in space. But the Pulfrich Effect shows us that depth is not always an objective fact. It can be created, altered, and manipulated by the way our brain processes visual information. What does this mean for our understanding of the world? If something as fundamental as depth can be illusionary, what else in our perception is constructed by the mind? The Pulfrich Effect is a gentle nudge toward the idea that what we see, what we believe to be real, may be far more malleable than we realize. This phenomenon also highlights how much we rely on our eyes to tell us the truth about the world. Our vision is one of the most trusted senses, the one we lean on most heavily to understand our surroundings. But when something as simple as a small delay in visual processing can change everything, we are reminded that our senses cannot always be trusted to provide the full story. And this doesn't just happen with depth. Our senses in general work together to create a unified experience of the world. But what happens when one sense falters, or when the input from one eye is slightly different from the other? The Pulfrich Effect shows that the brain doesn't just accept confusion, it works hard to resolve it, often creating new experiences where none existed. This illusion is also a reminder of the complexity of perception. Our brain takes in countless bits of information every second, processing them and shaping them into a coherent understanding of reality. The Pulfrich Effect shows that even when things seem simple, like a ball moving across the screen, our brain can twist them into something entirely different. As you watch the ball move, you may begin to notice the subtle shifts in your own perception. The movement feels like it's no longer confined to two dimensions. It has depth, it has shape, it has space, things that weren't there before. And this is the power of the mind. It can take simple information and turn it into something much more complex, much more immersive. The Pulfrich Effect also asks us to consider how much of our world is shaped by perception rather than reality. What we see is influenced not just by what's there but by the brain's interpretation of it. Our understanding of depth, of space, of movement is not always based on what's physically present, but on how our brain makes sense of the visual information it receives. When you experience the Pulfrich Effect, you might feel a bit disoriented. What you're seeing doesn't quite match what you know is true, but that's the point. Perception is not always a direct reflection of reality. It's a carefully constructed experience, built from fragments of information, and sometimes those fragments can be distorted. As the ball moves, you may start to see depth where there is none. The world shifts, the space changes, and for a moment you're caught in an altered reality, one created by your brain's own processing. The Pulfrich Effect shows how easily perception can be manipulated, how fragile our understanding of the world really is. And yet it all feels so real. There is a figure before you. She spins gracefully, her arms outstretched, her body in constant motion. The dance is fluid, mesmerizing. And yet something peculiar happens as you watch her. The direction of her spin seems to change. One moment she spins clockwise, the next she spins counterclockwise. At first you may be certain she's turning one way, her body in full rotation. But as you keep watching, your perception wavers. The direction of her movement doesn't seem fixed, and you find yourself wondering if the illusion is somehow tricking your eyes. This is the spinning dancer illusion, a paradox of movement that plays with your brain's understanding of motion. The figure seemingly spinning in one direction can shift its rotation depending on how your brain processes the image. It's a simple visual trick, but it reveals something profound about how we see the world. What's striking about this illusion is how personal it feels. One person might see her spinning clockwise, while another sees her spinning counterclockwise. But what's truly fascinating is that it's not about her movements, it's about how your brain chooses to interpret them, based on subtle shifts in perspective. The illusion works because of how our brains interpret depth and movement. The dancer's body is in constant motion, but the way we perceive her movement depends on how we assign direction to the spinning figure. We expect movement to follow certain patterns, and when those patterns are disrupted, the brain fills in the gaps with a perception that may or may not align with reality. This shifting direction isn't random, it's a reflection of the brain's attempt to resolve conflicting visual cues. Our brains are constantly interpreting what we see, making assumptions about depth, direction, and motion. But in the case of the spinning dancer, the mind has two possible interpretations, clockwise or counterclockwise, and it can only focus on one at a time. When you focus on the dancer, you may notice that changing your perspective or shifting your focus can cause the direction of the spin to flip. This happens because the brain is recalibrating, trying to make sense of the conflicting information. The brain doesn't just passively receive input, it actively constructs reality, making adjustments based on context and experience. In a way, the spinning dancer illusion is a metaphor for perception itself. What we see is not always a direct reflection of the world around us. It is an interpretation, a constructed reality, shaped by the brain's filters, biases, and assumptions, and sometimes those assumptions can lead us to see one thing, when in fact the truth may be something entirely different. The dancer's spin, while constant in motion, is a perfect example of how perception can be fluid, malleable, and subjective. What you see in one moment may shift without warning, depending on how your brain processes the information. The same image can be interpreted in two completely different ways, and the shift happens almost without your awareness. The spinning dancer also demonstrates how our brains work to fill in the gaps when we're uncertain. When we look at the spinning figure, we are seeing only a portion of the movement. The brain takes this incomplete information and makes a guess. Depending on how it fills in those gaps, it can create an entirely different experience. This illusion isn't just about the dancer, it's about how we perceive all movement. Our brains are constantly interpreting the flow of motion around us, but we don't always see it the way it really is. Sometimes we misinterpret what's in front of us, and what we think we see becomes an illusion. It's easy to assume that perception is a fixed process, that what we see is what's truly there. But the spinning dancer illusion shows us that perception is not so simple. It is an active, dynamic process, one that is influenced by how we choose to focus, how we process information, and even how we expect the world to behave. If you keep watching the dancer, the spinning may shift back and forth, clockwise and counterclockwise, depending on how you adjust your focus. This oscillation is a reminder of how easily our perceptions can shift, how reality is never as solid as we think it is. What seems fixed can change in an instant, based on our perception of it. There's a deeper truth in this illusion, that our minds are constantly working to make sense of the world. We process information, we form assumptions, and we create a version of reality based on what we think we know. The spinning dancer illusion is a beautiful example of how that process can sometimes lead us astray, distorting what we believe is true. This fluidity of perception is something we encounter every day, in countless ways. What we see is not always what's really there. Our minds, as brilliant as they are, can misinterpret the world, filling in gaps, making guesses, and sometimes even creating illusions where none exist. The more we think about how our minds shape reality, the more we begin to question how much of our experience is shaped by our expectations. The dancer's spin may not be a solid, unchanging truth. It may be a product of the mind's attempt to interpret motion, to create something tangible out of uncertainty. And as we watch, as we shift our focus, the dancer keeps spinning, her direction constantly changing. Each new perspective offers a different reality, and so we are reminded reality, like the spinning dancer, is often not what it seems. It's not fixed, it's a fluid, ever-shifting experience created by our minds, shaped by our perceptions. Imagine looking at two images, side by side. One of them is clear, crisp, and familiar, perhaps a simple shape or a pattern. The other, though, is different, almost indistinguishable. You focus on one image, trying to make sense of it, but as you do, the other image seems to appear, fleetingly, and then vanish again. This is binocular rivalry, a fascinating phenomenon that occurs when each eye is shown a different image. The images compete for attention, but your brain can only focus on one at a time. The result is a constant shift between the two images, as if the mind can't decide which one is more important, which one it should believe. At first, it might feel like a game of hide and seek. One image seems to dominate, filling your vision completely. But then, almost without warning, the other image pushes through, replacing it. The two images flip-flop, switching back and forth, each trying to capture your attention. This rivalry happens because our brains are designed to make sense of the world by combining the information from both eyes. Normally, when both eyes see the same thing, our brains merge those images seamlessly. But when the eyes are presented with conflicting visuals, the brain struggles to combine them, resulting in an experience where neither image fully dominates. Binocular rivalry reveals something profound about perception. We like to think of our senses as objective, as though they give us a clear view of the world. But what if our brains are not simply recording reality? What if they are actively choosing, filtering, and sometimes even fighting over what we see? When faced with two competing images, the brain chooses one and suppresses the other. It creates a reality where one image dominates, only to switch when the brain decides the other one is more important. This isn't about what's really there. It's about how the brain interprets conflicting information, making decisions about what to focus on. The illusion of binocular rivalry doesn't just show us how our brains process visual information. It also speaks to something deeper about how we experience the world. Perception is not a passive process, it's an active one, constantly selecting, prioritizing, and sometimes ignoring details in order to create a cohesive view of reality. This is why, when you focus on one image, the other seems to disappear. The brain, in its effort to make sense of the information, can't hold on to both images at once. It must choose, and in doing so, it shapes our experience of the world, creating a version of reality that feels solid, even though it may be based on constant shifts and adjustments. The more you observe this rivalry, the more it becomes clear what we see is not always a clear representation of the world around us. It is a construction built from the pieces that the brain deems most important. The brain selects what to focus on, filtering out everything else, sometimes to the point of creating illusions. What's striking about binocular rivalry is how much control the brain has over perception. We often think of our senses as merely receiving information, showing us the world as it is. But the brain is constantly interpreting, choosing, and sometimes even altering the information it receives to create a cohesive image of reality. This illusion also asks us to think about the nature of attention. How often do we focus on one thing at the expense of everything else around us? The brain does this with every moment, constantly choosing what to pay attention to and leaving the rest in the background. The images in binocular rivalry are just one example of how attention can shape our perception. The experience of switching between images is a gentle reminder that we don't always see the world as it is. We see it as we need to see it. The brain selects what is most relevant, ignoring or suppressing anything that doesn't fit the narrative. And sometimes, what we think we see is simply the result of this ongoing process. What's fascinating about binocular rivalry is that it's not just an optical illusion, it's a glimpse into the way our brains function. When presented with two competing pieces of information, the brain doesn't just take them both in, it chooses one, prioritizing it and suppressing the other, shaping the world as it sees fit. The constant switching between images creates a dynamic experience, one where the boundaries of perception seem fluid. It's a reminder that our sense of reality is not fixed. What we see is always in flux, shaped by our brain's choices, its priorities, and its constant effort to make sense of the world around us. In many ways, binocular rivalry is a metaphor for how we navigate life. We are constantly faced with choices, with competing pieces of information, and our brains must decide what to focus on. The world is full of contradictions, of competing ideas, and the brain works tirelessly to create a reality that feels whole, even when it's not. When you experience binocular rivalry, it's easy to feel disoriented. One image dominates your vision, only to be replaced by another, as if reality itself is shifting beneath your feet. This illusion shows us that perception is not always stable. It is a process, a construction, and sometimes the world we experience is not as solid as we think. What we see is not just a direct reflection of the world. It is a version of reality, created by the brain, shaped by attention, by choice, by necessity. Binocular rivalry shows us that reality is not fixed. It is something that the brain constantly adapts, shifts, and interprets, depending on what it deems most important at the time. You gaze at a waterfall, the water rushing downward in a steady stream. The movement is hypnotic, fluid, powerful. You stare for a while, feeling the constant rush, the smooth flow of water cascading over rocks. The world feels calm, and yet something strange is beginning to happen. As you shift your gaze, the world around you seems to shift too. The edges blur, the colors bend. The waterfall seems to slow down, its motion changing, but the water isn't really changing. It's still flowing, still moving at the same speed. It's your perception that's altered. This is the waterfall illusion, a trick that reveals how our brains process movement. After staring at the waterfall for long enough, you may notice that when you look away, the surrounding scene seems to move in the opposite direction. The trees sway, the rocks shift, everything seems to flow as if it's running backward. The effect occurs because your brain becomes adapted to the constant motion of the waterfall. It gets used to seeing the water move downward at a steady pace. But when you shift your focus, the brain's perception of movement is momentarily thrown off. It expects movement to continue in the same direction, but when the stimulus is removed, it overcompensates. This illusion shows us how much our brains rely on patterns to interpret the world. When something moves in a steady, predictable way, your brain begins to expect that motion. It becomes so accustomed to it that when that motion stops, the brain interprets the absence of movement as movement in the opposite direction. What's fascinating is how the waterfall illusion tricks the brain into perceiving motion where there is none. The surroundings seem to move as if they are flowing upward, even though they are perfectly still. This shift in perception is a reflection of how our minds constantly work to make sense of the world, often adjusting our experience of it based on what we expect. Our sense of movement isn't always as direct as we think. We rely on visual cues to tell us how things are moving, but sometimes those cues are misleading. The brain is constantly adjusting, filling in the gaps, trying to make sense of what it's seeing. The waterfall illusion shows us how easily our brains can be tricked by motion. The illusion also reveals something deeper about how we experience time. When you stare at the waterfall, time seems to stretch and bend. You are so focused on the motion that your perception of the passing moment is altered. Once you shift your gaze, the opposite movement feels just as real, even though it is an artifact of your mind's attempt to readjust. This effect isn't just about motion, it's about how the mind interprets change. The waterfall illusion is a reminder that our brains don't simply observe the world. They interpret it, often filling in missing pieces or overcompensating for what is no longer there. In this case, the brain's adjustment to the waterfall creates the illusion of motion in the opposite direction. The longer you watch the waterfall, the stronger the effect becomes. The more accustomed your brain becomes to the steady motion, the more exaggerated the perceived reversal when you look away. The mind's attempts to adjust to the constant flow are so strong that they leave you with a brief but vivid sensation of the opposite. This illusion is a beautiful example of how perception is not fixed. It's a dynamic, active process, one that can shift based on what the brain expects. What we see is not always a direct reflection of reality. It is shaped by our mind's attempts to make sense of the patterns around us, even when those patterns don't exist. Think about the way we process the world. Much of what we see, hear, and feel is a result of the brain filling in gaps, adjusting to stimuli, and making predictions about what will happen next. The waterfall illusion shows how the brain's predictions can lead to false perceptions, creating a reality that feels real but is actually distorted. The brain's reliance on motion patterns is a survival mechanism. It helps us navigate the world, anticipate actions, and respond to changes. But when this mechanism is overstretched or tricked, the world around us becomes fluid and uncertain. The waterfall illusion highlights this delicate balance between the world, as it is, and the world our brain creates. In a way, the waterfall illusion is a metaphor for the way we experience the passage of time. Like the water flowing downward, time seems to move steadily, predictably, but when we focus too intently on it, our perception can shift. We may feel as though time is moving in the opposite direction, as if the world around us is rewinding. This effect also asks us to reconsider our understanding of movement. When we see something moving, we don't just observe it, we feel it. We interpret it, and in doing so we create an experience that feels real. But sometimes, that interpretation is faulty, and the world we see is not the world as it truly is. When the illusion happens, you may feel a sense of disorientation, as though the world itself has changed. The motion, the flow of the water, has been replaced with an unnatural stillness, followed by a strange reversal. But this is the brain's interpretation of the missing motion, an artifact of the mind's effort to make sense of what it no longer understands. The waterfall illusion is a reminder that perception is fluid, shifting, and constantly in flux. What we see is not fixed. It is shaped by our minds, our expectations, and our focus. The illusion shows us how easily the mind can misinterpret simple movements, creating a version of reality that feels real but is based on misperceptions. What's truly fascinating about the waterfall illusion is how it demonstrates the interplay between motion, time, and perception. The steady flow of the water, the passage of time, and our expectations all come together to create an illusion. It's a reminder that reality is not just what we see, it's how our minds interpret what we see. As you watch the waterfall's constant flow, you may begin to notice how your perception shifts, how the world moves differently. But even in those shifts, the waterfall is still flowing, still moving. The illusion doesn't change the water, it changes how you experience it, and that is a powerful reminder of how perception is always in motion. You look at a bright light, maybe a lamp or a screen, and then you look away. For a brief moment, a shadow of that light lingers, floating in your vision, like an echo. You blink, and it's still there, a faint image that refuses to fade. This is the afterimage effect, a curious visual phenomenon where your eyes, having been exposed to a bright stimulus, create an impression that lingers long after the stimulus is gone. It's as if your mind has captured the image and continues to display it, even though the original source is no longer there. At first, it's subtle, just a faint trace, a soft outline where the bright object once was. But as you focus on the afterimage, it becomes more pronounced. It can take the shape of the object you were looking at, like a glowing spot or a shadow, hanging in the air, refusing to vanish. What's fascinating is how the afterimage behaves. It seems to occupy the space where the original image was, but it feels separate, detached from the reality you just experienced. It's not a real object, it's a ghostly reflection, a remnant left behind by your eyes, struggling to reset after exposure to bright light. The afterimage is a reminder of how our minds process information. When you stare at something bright for too long, your eyes become overstimulated, and they temporarily lose their ability to adjust. The result is the lingering image, as though your mind is trying to hold on to the brightness even after the stimulus has disappeared. This lingering image isn't just an optical artifact. It shows how our brains create and sustain visual impressions, how they try to maintain the clarity of an image even after it's gone. The brain, in its attempt to make sense of the world, holds on to what it saw for a little longer, filling the gap between what was and what is. The afterimage effect reveals the limits of our senses. Our eyes are not perfect recorders of reality. They are interpreters, constantly processing and adapting to the world around us. When they become overwhelmed, like when they are exposed to bright light, they leave behind traces, impressions of the world that linger longer than they should. What's even more interesting is how the afterimage can change based on the nature of the stimulus. If you stare at a red object, the afterimage might appear in green, as though your eyes are compensating for the intense red. This color shift is another example of how the brain interprets and adjusts visual information, even when the object itself is no longer present. This color shift also shows how much of our visual experience is constructed. What we see is not just a direct reflection of the world around us, it's a complex interaction between our eyes, our brain, and the environment. The afterimage effect is a small glimpse into the ways our perception of the world is shaped, not just by what is physically present, but by how our brain processes that information. It's not just about light and color. The afterimage can also occur with shapes and patterns. If you stare at a shape for a long time and then look away, that shape can linger in your vision, distorted or inverted, as though your brain is trying to hold on to the image even after it's been removed from your field of view. The persistence of the afterimage also speaks to how we experience time. It suggests that what we see isn't always a live, unfolding moment. Sometimes, our brains hold on to images from the past, creating a version of reality that is slightly out of sync with what is actually happening. The afterimage lingers as a reminder that perception is not always instantaneous, it's delayed, sometimes incomplete. You might think that when you turn away from a light, your eyes reset immediately, but the afterimage shows that this is not the case. The image sticks, leaving behind a trail, a reminder of what you've just seen. The brain doesn't simply erase the image when the stimulus is gone. Instead, it holds on to it for just a little longer, keeping the impression alive in your vision. In some ways, the afterimage effect is like the echo of a sound that lingers in your mind. Just as your ears continue to resonate with a loud noise long after it has stopped, your eyes continue to see the light long after it has faded. This shows how much our perception is a construction, not just a passive recording of the world. The afterimage reminds us that the world we experience is not just what's in front of us, it's a mixture of what we see and what our brain creates based on past experiences, sensory input, and memory. What we think we see is often shaped by what we've just seen, as our brains struggle to reconcile the present with the past. This lingering sensation of sight also makes us question how reliable our senses are. If we can still see an image after the stimulus is gone, how much of what we think we see in the moment is actually a result of the brain's interpretation rather than a true reflection of the world? The afterimage also asks us to think about how much of our reality is based on memory. It's not just the immediate moment that we experience, but the traces of past experiences that linger in our minds, coloring our present perceptions. What we see isn't always now. Sometimes it's a mix of what has just passed and what our minds have created to fill in the gaps. Perhaps the most fascinating part of the afterimage effect is how it highlights the mind's effort to maintain continuity. Even when the light fades, the brain keeps the image alive for just a moment longer, trying to preserve the world it has just experienced. The persistence of vision shows us how much of our perception is about holding on to the past, even when the present is already slipping away. So the next time you experience an afterimage, think about the layers of perception it reveals. What we see is never just a simple recording of the world. It's always filtered, shaped, and reinterpreted by our minds. The afterimage is a brief reminder of how perception doesn't just passively receive information, it actively creates and reconstructs our reality. You hear a sound, it's faint, distant, a hum perhaps. It seems to come from nowhere, but as you listen more closely, it starts to take shape. Words, maybe, a melody, perhaps. The longer you listen, the clearer it becomes, and suddenly there's a voice calling your name. This is auditory pareidolia, the phenomenon where the brain interprets random or ambiguous sounds as familiar patterns, like words, music, or even voices. It's as if your mind can't help but impose meaning on the sounds it hears, turning something vague into something tangible, something understandable. At first, the sound might be unintelligible, a buzz, a whir, or a faint static. But your brain, always searching for patterns, starts to fill in the gaps. It's not just a sound, it's a word, a sentence, something familiar that your mind is shaping from the noise. You could swear it's there, even though no one is speaking. The effect is subtle, but powerful. The more you listen, the more distinct the sound becomes. It's no longer random noise, it's a voice, it's a tune, it's a message you can almost hear. The brain fills in the spaces, turning something chaotic into something understandable, even though it's not really there. What's fascinating is that auditory pareidolia doesn't rely on clear sound. It works even when the noise is vague, distorted, or unintelligible. It's the brain's way of making sense of the world. It doesn't need perfect clarity. It just needs something to latch onto, something familiar to recognize. This phenomenon happens all the time. Maybe you've heard the rustle of leaves on a windy day and imagined someone whispering your name. Or perhaps you've listened to a song and the background hum sounds like a voice, speaking words that aren't there. These are all examples of how the brain fills in the gaps. Auditory pareidolia is a reminder of how our brains are constantly working to make sense of the world. We are always listening, always searching for meaning in the sounds around us, even when there is none. Our minds crave pattern, structure, and clarity, and when it's missing, they create it from the fragments available. It's like seeing faces in clouds or hearing words in a song you've never fully understood. The brain takes what's ambiguous and turns it into something meaningful. But this doesn't mean that the sound we're hearing is real. It's a product of the mind, not the outside world. This effect isn't limited to simple sounds. It can happen with music too. You might hear a song, and in the quietest moments, you start to think you hear a melody that isn't there. Or perhaps a beat or rhythm seems to echo in a way that makes sense only to you, a unique interpretation of the sound around you. In some cases, auditory pareidolia can even be unsettling. A faint hum might start to sound like distant conversation, voices you can't place, words you can't quite understand. The brain, in its search for meaning, might pull those voices into something real, even though they aren't. It's a reminder of how much our minds shape our experience of reality. What's most interesting is how easily the brain can trick us. When we hear something we can't quite make out, we want to make sense of it. The brain doesn't leave things unfinished. It wants to complete the puzzle, so it provides a solution, even when that solution isn't accurate. The sound may be nothing more than static, but your brain insists it's something more. This illusion tells us something about our perception of the world. We often assume that what we hear is real, that it's an accurate reflection of the outside world. But auditory pareidolia shows us that what we hear is as much about what the brain wants to hear as it is about what's actually there. The experience of auditory pareidolia can be subtle, almost unnoticed, but when you start to listen closely, you realize how much the brain is constantly shaping the world around you. It's not just what you see or what you feel. What you hear is also filtered through layers of interpretation, expectation, and pattern recognition. This effect also sheds light on how our brains function in everyday life. We are constantly bombarded with sound, with noise, with information. The brain can't possibly process it all at once, so it focuses on what seems most important, filtering out the rest. In doing so, it can create experiences, like hearing voices in the static, that feel real, even though they're not. Auditory pareidolia is a small window into the way the brain processes all sensory information. The world is filled with patterns, with familiar shapes and sounds, but those patterns aren't always based in reality. Our minds create meaning, filling in the gaps, completing the puzzle, even when the pieces don't quite fit. Sometimes, the brain's need for meaning can feel like a gift. It allows us to recognize faces in crowds, voices in noise, and patterns in chaos. But at other times, it can trick us into hearing things that aren't there. The brain, always striving to make sense of the world, sometimes fills in those gaps with illusions. In a way, auditory pareidolia is like a game the mind plays with itself. It takes something uncertain, something unclear, and turns it into something familiar, something understood. It's a process that happens automatically, almost without our awareness, as the brain works to make the world feel more predictable. This phenomenon invites us to consider how much of our experience is shaped by the mind's expectations. The world is not just what we see or hear, it's a blend of sensory input and the brain's own constructions, constantly interpreting, filtering, and making meaning out of everything around us. And so the next time you hear a faint whisper in the background, or think you hear a word in a song that isn't really there, remember that it's not your ears deceiving you. It's your mind in its quest for meaning, creating something from nothing, filling the gaps with the sounds it wants to hear. You glance at a cloud in the sky, drifting lazily across a clear blue canvas. As your eyes move over the soft edges, you begin to notice something strange, a face perhaps, or the shape of a creature. The cloud doesn't really have a form, but your mind insists it does. This is visual pareidolia, the phenomenon where the brain sees patterns, faces, or shapes in random or ambiguous stimuli. It's as if your mind cannot help but impose meaning on what it sees, turning clouds into faces, rock formations into animals, or even abstract shapes into something familiar. At first, it might seem like a trick of the light, a fleeting moment where your brain latches onto a pattern and gives it meaning. But as you focus, the image becomes clearer. The cloud, once amorphous and shapeless, now seems to have purpose, as though it's trying to tell you something. Visual pareidolia is everywhere. You might see a face in the surface of a rock or a tree stump, or you might notice a figure hidden in the folds of curtains or in a patch of dirt. The human mind is wired to recognize faces, and that instinct spills over into all sorts of patterns, even when they aren't really there. This tendency to see faces is so strong that it's even known as the face pareidolia effect. Our brains are built to recognize faces quickly and easily, and so, when faced with ambiguous shapes, they jump to conclusions, interpreting them as human features. This ability was once crucial for survival, helping early humans detect faces and emotions in others. The thing about visual pareidolia is that it doesn't just stop at faces. You might see animals, objects, or scenes in places where there's nothing but randomness. A pile of rocks may look like a sitting dog, or a patch of grass may appear to form a bird in flight. These shapes are not real, but they feel real to the brain. What's fascinating is how your brain works to make sense of the chaos. When you see something familiar in an abstract pattern, your brain interprets it as a meaningful image. This pattern recognition is a way for the brain to create structure out of disorder, making the world feel more predictable, even when it's chaotic. The illusion isn't just about what we see, it's about how the mind fills in the gaps. When there's ambiguity, when things are unclear, the brain imposes its own order, drawing on memory and experience to create something recognizable. It's the mind's way of trying to make sense of the world, even when the world doesn't make sense. This phenomenon shows us how our brains actively construct reality. Perception isn't just about receiving information, it's about interpreting it, filling in missing details, and creating a cohesive story. The images we see aren't always reflections of what's out there. They are shaped by our brain's effort to interpret the world around us. You might see a face in the clouds, but the image is nothing more than random shapes and light. What your brain does is create order from disorder. It finds patterns, and in doing so, it creates a version of reality that feels real, even when it's based on nothing more than an illusion. What's most interesting is how universal this phenomenon is. People from all walks of life, from all cultures, report seeing similar patterns. A rock that looks like a face, a tree that resembles a figure. These are common experiences, and they speak to the way our brains are wired to look for familiar shapes in everything we see. Visual pareidolia reminds us that our senses are not as passive as we might think. They are active participants in how we experience the world. The brain doesn't just take in information, it shapes and molds it, filling in the gaps and creating a version of reality that feels comforting, familiar, and safe. In many ways, visual pareidolia is a metaphor for how we navigate life. We are constantly interpreting, constantly searching for meaning, even in randomness. The mind looks for patterns in the chaos, trying to make sense of a world that is often unpredictable. And when it finds something familiar, it holds onto it, creating a sense of certainty. This urge to create meaning is not limited to images. Our brains apply this pattern recognition to everything, from sounds to faces to experiences. We are constantly trying to piece together the world, to see the familiar in the unfamiliar, to make the chaotic feel ordered and understandable. Visual pareidolia is just one example of this fundamental drive. It's easy to assume that our senses simply report what's out there, that what we see is exactly what is in front of us. But the truth is more complicated. The brain is constantly editing, interpreting, and filling in the gaps, often creating illusions that feel as real as the objects themselves. The faces you see in the clouds, the figures you spot in the landscape, these are creations of the mind, born from its need to impose meaning on the world. But the more you look, the more you realize that these shapes aren't really there. They are the product of your mind's search for familiarity, a trick of perception. In a sense, visual pareidolia is a window into how perception works. It shows us that what we see is not always what's out there. It's a blend of the external world and the brain's internal processes, a mixture of reality and illusion, where the mind constantly strives to create something familiar from what might be nothing at all. And so when you spot a face in a patch of clouds or a figure in the bark of a tree, remember that it's not magic. It's your brain doing its job, filling in the gaps, creating meaning from randomness. What you see is not always what's truly there, but it feels real, and that's what matters to the mind. A series of squares appear before you, each surrounded by different shades of color. As you look at them, one square seems to stand out, its color shifting and changing. It looks brighter or darker than the others, even though they are all exactly the same. This is the simultaneous contrast illusion, where the perception of color changes based on the surrounding colors. The square that seemed to change its shade isn't actually any different. It's your perception that has shifted, influenced by the hues surrounding it. The illusion works because your brain interprets colors relative to the ones around them. When a color is placed next to something lighter, it can appear darker. When placed next to something darker, it can appear lighter. It's a trick of the mind, a way for your brain to compare and contrast. This contrast isn't just about brightness, it can affect the way we see all colors. A red square might seem to change when placed next to green or blue, even though its actual color remains unchanged. Your brain adjusts the color, trying to make sense of the relationships between hues. What's striking about this illusion is that it makes you question your own senses. You might look at the squares and be sure that one is different from the others, but as soon as you remove the surrounding colors, you realize they're all the same. It's an illusion that tricks you into seeing something that isn't really there. In a way, the simultaneous contrast illusion reveals the brain's method of processing color. It shows that our perception of color isn't fixed, it's relative. We don't just see colors as they are, we see them in relation to everything else around them, which constantly shifts the way we experience the world. The power of this illusion lies in its subtlety. It's easy to dismiss it as a simple quirk of the eye, but the truth is deeper. It's a window into how our brains interpret the world. What we see is shaped by context, by the surrounding environment, by how our mind frames what it perceives. This isn't just an isolated effect, it happens constantly. Every time you look at something, your brain is comparing it to the things around it. You might think you're seeing an object's true color, but in reality, your mind is adjusting it based on its surroundings. Imagine the last time you looked at a painting or a photograph. The colors might have looked different depending on the lighting, the shadows, or the colors next to them. This constant shifting of color is a natural part of how our brains interpret the visual world. The simultaneous contrast illusion also challenges our assumptions about what we know. It's easy to assume that our eyes tell us the truth, that what we see is what's really there, but the illusion shows us that perception is far more complex. What we see is shaped by more than just the object in front of us. When you experience this illusion, it's as though the world itself becomes fluid, dynamic. The colors you thought were fixed now seem to move, change, and adapt. You are reminded that perception is not a passive process. It's active, dynamic, constantly shifting in response to the world around you. It also raises an interesting question. If color is relative, then how much of what we see is truly real? The colors around us are not just perceived in isolation, they are always interpreted in relation to something else, making our experience of color a constructed reality, shaped by context and comparison. This effect also highlights how easy it is for our minds to be influenced by external factors. The surrounding environment, the lighting, even the smallest change in contrast can completely alter our perception. What we think of as stable and constant is actually in constant flux, shaped by the ever-changing world around us. When you look at the squares and the colors seem to shift, you realize how much of our experience of the world is based on illusion. We think we know what we see, but in reality, what we experience is shaped by the context, the frame, the environment we're in. This illusion isn't just about color, it's about how we process all sensory information. Every piece of the world around us is influenced by what's next to it, what surrounds it, and how it fits into the larger picture. Our senses don't just passively take in information, they actively compare, contrast, and adjust what they perceive. In a way, the simultaneous contrast illusion shows how our brains are constantly creating a version of the world, not just observing it. We don't see things in isolation, we see them in relation to everything else, and this relationship shapes our perception of reality. What's remarkable about this illusion is how quickly the brain shifts its perception, how easily it changes the way we experience color. It's as if our minds are constantly recalibrating, adjusting the world to make sense of it, even if that means distorting it. What we see is never as fixed as we think. Every time you experience the simultaneous contrast illusion, you're reminded of the fluidity of perception. It's a window into the mind's ability to create meaning, to adjust the world based on what it's used to, based on the environment around it. What we see, what we know, is always subject to change. In the end, what seems like a simple visual trick is really a glimpse into how the mind shapes the world. The way we experience color and reality itself is not as stable as we believe. The simultaneous contrast illusion shows us that perception is an active process, always adapting, always shifting in response to what's around us. A checkerboard pattern appears, its alternating squares of light and dark, creating a familiar regular design. At first, everything looks as expected, but then you focus on one square, and it seems to change color. The square is part of a larger picture, and yet it no longer fits. This is the checker shadow illusion, an optical trick that reveals the complexity of how we perceive light and color. On a simple checkerboard, some squares seem lighter or darker than others, but if you look closely, you'll see that the colors are actually identical. What you're seeing isn't reality, it's your brain's interpretation. The illusion works because of the way light and shadow affect our perception. Some squares appear to be in shadow, while others are illuminated. The brain interprets the shaded squares as being darker, even though they are the same color as the illuminated ones. The context of the lighting tricks the mind into seeing differences that aren't there. What's fascinating is how the brain uses light and shadow to inform our understanding of color. It assumes that objects in shadow are darker and objects in light are lighter. This makes sense in the real world, but in the world of perception, this assumption can distort our view, creating illusions like the one on the checkerboard. In this illusion, you might see a square that looks white next to a dark square. You may think the white square is much lighter than the dark one. But the moment you take away the context of the checkerboard's lighting, the squares become identical. They are the same color, but your mind has adjusted them based on their surroundings. The checker-shadow illusion is a reminder that perception is not a simple reflection of reality. What we see is shaped by the surrounding context, by the patterns our brain has learned over time. Our brains are constantly interpreting information, making assumptions based on our experiences and expectations. When you look at the checkerboard and see the colors shift, it's a powerful reminder that what we experience is often a construct of the mind. Our brains don't just passively receive information, they actively make sense of the world, filling in gaps, making guesses, and sometimes even creating illusions. This phenomenon also raises interesting questions about how much of our perception is based on learned assumptions. We expect objects in shadow to be darker. We expect objects in light to be lighter. But when the brain makes these assumptions, it can lead us to see something that isn't really there. The world we see is not always an accurate reflection of the world as it is. The illusion also shows how easily our brains can be tricked. It's not just that we're seeing the squares differently. The brain is actively changing the way we perceive color based on the context of the light and shadow. This manipulation happens so subtly that we don't even realize it's happening. At the heart of the checker-shadow illusion is the idea that color is relative. We don't see color in isolation. We see it in context, in relation to the surrounding environment. And this context is what guides our perception, sometimes leading us to see something entirely different from what is actually there. This illusion also demonstrates how the brain works to create consistency. We are wired to assume that colors under certain lighting conditions are accurate, even when they are not. The checker-shadow illusion challenges this assumption, showing that our perception can be influenced by factors like lighting, shadow, and context, rather than just the inherent properties of the object. The more you focus on the illusion, the more you begin to see how complex our perception of the world really is. We often think of what we see as objective, as a direct reflection of reality. But the truth is that perception is much more fluid. It is shaped by many factors, and the brain works tirelessly to create a sense of consistency, even when the world is anything but consistent. What's also intriguing is how this illusion feels like a momentary lapse in clarity. For a brief instant, what you see doesn't match the truth. But then as you shift your focus or adjust your perception, you begin to understand that the squares are the same. The mind has been playing tricks, creating an illusion based on lighting, shadow, and expectation. The illusion isn't just a clever trick, it's a clue about how our brains work. It's a reminder that we don't always see the world as it truly is. We see it through a lens shaped by assumptions, expectations, and patterns. What we experience as real is often a creation of our minds, built from fragments of information. In many ways, the checker-shadow illusion is a metaphor for life. We look at the world and think we see it clearly, but often our perception is shaped by what surrounds us, by what we've learned, and by what we expect to see. What we believe is true may be distorted by these external influences. This illusion also speaks to how adaptable the mind is. The brain is constantly adjusting to new information, constantly recalibrating its expectations. When it encounters something unexpected, like a distorted square, it tries to make sense of it. And sometimes, it makes the wrong choice, creating an illusion that feels as real as anything else. The checker-shadow illusion shows us that the world is not always as it appears. Our perception is malleable, shaped by the context, the light, the surroundings. We might think we're seeing an objective reality, but what we're really seeing is the product of our mind's constant effort to interpret and understand the world. As you watch the squares shift, as you focus on the illusion, you begin to realize how much of what we see is shaped by our brains. The colors are not simply there, they are created by our minds, influenced by what surrounds them. What we see is not always a reflection of reality, it is a creation of our own perception. You speak, and your words echo back to you almost instantly. The sound is clear, immediate, as though your voice is perfectly in sync with your thoughts. But what if there was a slight delay? A brief pause between what you say and when you hear it. Suddenly, the world feels out of sync. This is the delayed auditory feedback phenomenon, an illusion where the sound of your own voice is played back to you with a slight delay. At first, it's subtle, a fraction of a second between speaking and hearing. But that small delay is enough to create a strange disconnect, as though the voice you're hearing isn't your own. As you continue to speak, you may find yourself stumbling over your words. You start to second-guess what you've just said. The sound of your voice, delayed by that small gap, no longer matches up with your speech. The disconnect grows, and suddenly, the world you know, the way you hear yourself, feels slightly distorted. The brain is sensitive to timing, particularly when it comes to sound. We rely on real-time feedback to coordinate our movements, our speech, our thoughts. When that feedback is delayed, even by a small amount, the brain has to adjust, but it's not always able to do so quickly enough. The result is a disorienting experience, where reality feels slightly out of sync. This illusion also shows how our perception of sound is tied to our sense of self. When you speak, you expect to hear your voice immediately. It's part of your sense of identity. But when that feedback is delayed, even for a fraction of a second, it creates a gap between who you think you are and what you're hearing, creating a sense of unfamiliarity. What's particularly interesting is that the delay doesn't just affect how you hear yourself. It also affects how you speak. As the feedback lags, your brain starts to adjust, but the adjustment isn't always smooth. You may find yourself pausing, hesitating, or even speaking in a rhythm that doesn't quite match the flow of your thoughts. The delayed auditory feedback illusion is a reminder of how fragile our sense of reality can be. We take for granted the seamless synchronization between what we say and what we hear. But when that synchronization is disrupted, even slightly, the world feels like it's shifting beneath us. The illusion reveals how dependent our brains are on immediate sensory feedback. This phenomenon doesn't just affect speech, it also affects other actions. If you clap your hands and hear a delayed echo, the same disorienting effect occurs. The brain becomes confused, unable to reconcile the delay with the real-time experience. It's as though the brain's internal clock has been thrown off, making the world feel slower, out of time. It's amazing how such a small change, a delay of just a fraction of a second, can have such a large impact on our perception. What we think is a smooth, continuous experience becomes jagged and uncertain. The brain, which normally synchronizes the senses effortlessly, is thrown into disarray when the feedback loop is disrupted. In a way, the delayed auditory feedback illusion is like a ripple in the fabric of reality. The world around us feels slightly off, as if we're seeing or hearing through a filter that's not quite aligned. The voice you hear is yours, but it doesn't quite match the voice you expect to hear. The experience is unsettling, but also fascinating in its simplicity. What's intriguing is how quickly the brain tries to adjust. At first, the delay feels jarring, but over time, the brain tries to compensate. It attempts to synchronize the speech with the feedback, but the adjustment isn't perfect. It's like trying to fit pieces of a puzzle that don't quite match, creating an experience that is both confusing and enlightening. This phenomenon reveals just how much we rely on timing for our understanding of the world. We don't just perceive sound as it comes to us. We expect it to arrive in sync with our actions, with our movements. When that timing is disrupted, it forces us to reconsider how deeply our perception is intertwined with the flow of events around us. Think about the times when you've heard a sound out of sync, whether it's the sound of a movie character's voice or the delayed echo of a shout in a canyon. The sensation is always disorienting, a reminder that our perception is built on timing, coordination, and synchronization. When that balance is upset, reality itself feels like it's slipping away. The delayed auditory feedback illusion also speaks to how we experience our thoughts. When we speak, we often hear our voice not just as sound but as part of our inner experience. It's an extension of ourselves. But when the voice is delayed, that connection weakens. The voice becomes something separate, something outside of us, causing a subtle shift in how we perceive our own identity. This small subtle illusion also highlights how much we rely on our senses to understand the world. The brain doesn't just passively receive information, it actively processes it, looking for consistency, for patterns. When the world doesn't match the patterns we expect, our perception is thrown off, revealing how fragile our sense of reality really is. In daily life, this illusion is rare, but when it happens, it's a fascinating reminder of how our brains work. The next time you hear an echo, a delayed sound, or even something out of sync, notice how it feels. The mind works tirelessly to make sense of the world, and even the smallest disruption can have a profound impact on how we experience reality. The delayed auditory feedback illusion is a small but powerful reminder that perception is not always as stable as we think. The world we experience is constantly shaped by the feedback we receive from our senses. When that feedback is delayed, it's as if the world itself is momentarily out of sync, throwing us off balance and showing us how easily our minds can be tricked. A flash of light fills the room, sharp and bright. It's brief, almost too quick to notice, but it's there. At the same time, a sound follows, a pop, a sharp crackle. For a moment, everything seems to overlap, the light and sound mingling in your mind. But when you pause, you realize something strange. The flash, though vivid, was caused by nothing but the sound. There was no actual burst of light, no flicker, no sudden illumination. The sound itself, just a simple noise, tricked your brain into perceiving a flash, creating an illusion that links sound and sight in a way that doesn't actually exist. This is the sound-induced flash illusion, where a sound causes your brain to perceive a flash of light that isn't really there. The experience is disorienting, as your senses seem to merge, causing a visual response to something you only heard. The mind, it seems, has its own idea of how reality should unfold. The sound itself is usually a brief, sharp noise, like a click or a pop. The brain, expecting a visual element to accompany the sharpness of the sound, creates a flash, an image that seems to match the intensity of the sound. It's a momentary trick, but it feels real, as if the sound was somehow tied to light. What's fascinating is how easily the brain blends these two senses. It doesn't require a visual stimulus to trigger the flash. The sound alone is enough to create a false connection, allowing the mind to superimpose light where there is none. It's a beautiful example of how the senses don't always operate in isolation. The sound-induced flash illusion also speaks to the brain's need for consistency. The mind seeks patterns, connections, and coherence in the world around it. When a sound is sharp and sudden, the brain automatically assumes that it should be accompanied by something visually striking, like a flash of light. When the flash doesn't exist, the brain simply creates it. This phenomenon also shows how our experiences of the world are built on predictions. The brain is constantly making educated guesses about what will happen next, based on what has happened before. When you hear a sharp sound, your brain anticipates a corresponding visual cue, a flash of light, for example. When that doesn't happen, it compensates by producing one, creating an illusion. What's most intriguing is how this illusion doesn't require a large or obvious sound. A small pop, a soft crackle, these sounds can be enough to trigger the illusion. The mind doesn't need a loud bang to create the perception of a flash. It just needs a signal that the brain can interpret, and it will do the rest. This experience challenges our understanding of perception. We often think of our senses as separate. What we see and what we hear are distinct, independent of each other. But the sound-induced flash illusion shows how fluid and interconnected our senses really are. The brain doesn't treat sight and sound as separate channels. It blends them together, creating an integrated experience. It also reveals something deeper about how the brain organizes information. We don't just see and hear in isolation. Our brains are constantly comparing, combining, and interpreting sensory data to create a cohesive understanding of the world. The sound-induced flash illusion shows how this process can go awry, leading to a perception of something that isn't there. When you experience this illusion, it's almost as though the senses are colliding. The flash of light is paired with the sound in a way that feels natural, even though it isn't. This highlights how much of what we perceive is a creation of the brain, not a direct reflection of the world. The mind creates an experience based on what it expects, not necessarily what is actually present. It's also worth considering how often we experience similar sensory fusion in everyday life. Think about how certain sounds like the rumble of thunder can create a visual sensation of impending darkness, or how the sound of a bell can trigger the image of a door opening. Our brains are constantly weaving together sensory input to create a full, cohesive experience. The sound-induced flash illusion is a reminder that what we experience is not always what is real. Our senses are not passive, they are active participants in creating reality. The brain constantly interprets, adjusts, and fills in gaps, sometimes leading to perceptions that feel as real as anything else, even when they aren't. This illusion also brings into focus the nature of attention. The brain is constantly sifting through sensory information, deciding what's important and what can be ignored. In this case, the brain deems the sound important enough to deserve a visual response, even if that response is purely imagined. What we focus on shapes what we experience, whether or not it's based in reality. This phenomenon is also an example of the brain's ability to create coherence. When sensory input seems out of sync or incomplete, the brain works hard to fill in the gaps, even if that means constructing an experience that doesn't exist. The sound-induced flash illusion is a manifestation of the brain's drive to make sense of the world, even when that means creating something new. The more you think about it, the more you realize how much of what we experience is a construction. We don't passively receive information from our senses, we actively create our experience of the world. The sound-induced flash illusion is a beautiful, subtle reminder of this active interpretive process that shapes everything we know. In many ways, this illusion is a metaphor for how we experience life itself. We are constantly hearing, seeing, feeling, and interpreting the world, but much of what we think is real is shaped by our minds. What we experience is often not a true reflection of the world, but a creation of our own senses, woven together by our brains. So, as you encounter the illusion, notice how your senses blend together, how the sound triggers a flash of light. It's a brief moment, a trick of the mind, but it reveals so much about the fluid, dynamic nature of perception. Reality is not as fixed as we think, it's constantly shifting, constantly constructed by the mind. Your eyes dart quickly from one side of the room to the other. In that brief moment, everything around you seems to blur. For an instant, the world seems to disappear, and yet when your gaze settles, everything looks perfectly normal again, as if nothing has changed at all. This is the effect of saccadic masking, a phenomenon that occurs during the rapid eye movements known as saccades. These quick shifts in gaze happen when you look from one point to another, and during this motion, your brain briefly blocks out the visual information. The world becomes a blur, and yet your mind doesn't notice. It's as if, in the blink of an eye, the brain presses pause on your vision, just for a moment to smooth out the shift. When you stop moving your eyes, everything snaps back into place, as if that brief lapse in perception never happened. The brain fills in the gap without you even realizing it. What's fascinating about saccadic masking is how seamless it is. When you move your eyes, the brain suppresses your awareness of the blurry gap, even though you're missing information. It's a clever way of preventing the world from feeling fragmented during quick movements, yet it shows just how much of what we see is pieced together by the mind. These eye movements are essential for scanning the environment, helping us take in information from different angles. But while your eyes shift rapidly between points, the brain makes sure you don't experience any unpleasant disruptions. Saccadic masking fills in the blanks, creating the illusion that you never lose track of what's happening around you. Despite the fact that our eyes are in constant motion, we rarely notice it. This smooth transition is a product of the brain's ability to suppress the blur and replace it with continuity. We don't perceive the world as fragmented or distorted, even though our eyes are constantly darting between points, gathering new pieces of the puzzle. The illusion doesn't stop at a mere flicker. It shows just how much of what we see is based on assumption and filling in gaps. The brain doesn't simply capture a snapshot of the world. Instead, it interprets the sensory input, creating a stable, continuous experience by piecing together the different fragments we see and hear. Think of how you view a busy street. Your eyes don't focus on everything at once. They dart from one person to another, scanning for details. Yet you experience the street as if you're seeing everything simultaneously. The brain works to combine all the snippets of visual information into a coherent full picture, even when it's pieced together through many rapid eye movements. But how often do we stop to think about this process? Most of the time, we're completely unaware of how our eyes are constantly moving. We never notice the blur during saccadic shifts, and we don't feel the gaps in perception. Our brains are so skilled at creating continuity that the slight disruptions become invisible to us. Saccadic masking highlights the role of the brain in constructing reality. It's not just a passive receiver of information. The brain actively works to create a seamless experience, even though the information it receives is constantly shifting. This smooth, continuous perception is an illusion crafted by the brain to make the world feel stable and predictable. The phenomenon also reveals how little we truly see in one moment. Our eyes don't capture a wide, detailed view at once. Instead, we scan piece by piece, and the brain combines these fragments into a full picture. The more you understand this process, the more you realize how much of what we experience is a product of the mind's interpretation. This process also shows us how our minds fill in the gaps. The blurry, missed moments during a saccadic movement aren't lost to us. The brain works to fill in that space, completing the picture as though nothing was ever missing. In a sense, our perception is always incomplete, but the brain ensures we never feel that incompleteness. Think about how often we move through the world without noticing these gaps. We don't usually notice how much of the visual information around us is being processed behind the scenes. It's as though the brain is working tirelessly to smooth over any disturbances, keeping our sense of reality intact even when our eyes are constantly in motion. In a way, saccadic masking is a reminder of how much we rely on our brains to shape our perception. The world we see is not a perfect, uninterrupted stream of information. It's a collection of fragments, each brought together by the brain's ability to suppress disruptions and create a continuous experience. What's also intriguing is how this process isn't limited to just vision. We experience similar phenomena in other senses. The brain constantly fills in gaps in hearing, in touch, and in taste, making our experience of the world feel seamless, even though it's actually a carefully constructed version of reality. The effect of saccadic masking asks us to reconsider our understanding of perception. We often assume that what we see is a direct reflection of the world. But the truth is that perception is an active process, one shaped by the brain's need to create stability and continuity, even when the world is constantly shifting. This illusion isn't just a small trick, it's a glimpse into the brain's ability to create a stable reality from shifting, fragmented information. Our eyes are constantly in motion, our senses constantly adapting, and yet we experience the world as if it's stable and continuous. The brain, it seems, is always at work, making sure the world we perceive remains whole. Saccadic masking also reminds us that our perception of the world is not a perfect reflection. It's not a series of clear, unbroken images. It's a fluid, adaptive process shaped by our brain's efforts to keep things constant, even when the world around us is full of gaps, changes, and interruptions. You see a flash of light, followed by a sound. The flash and sound seem to occur at the same time, synchronized perfectly. But what if I told you they didn't happen together? What if there was a small gap between them, so brief that your mind blends them into a single experience? This is the temporal binding illusion, where your brain combines separate events that happen close together in time, making them seem like one continuous experience. You hear a sound, and before the echo even fades, you see the flash. The brain ties them together, even though they didn't occur in perfect sync. The fascinating thing about temporal binding is how the brain fills in the gaps. It takes two events that happen separately and binds them together in time, creating a smooth, continuous experience. It's as if the brain is trying to make sense of the world, knitting together the pieces in a way that feels seamless. In this illusion, the flash and the sound aren't actually happening simultaneously. One may precede the other by a tiny fraction of a second, but your mind doesn't register that difference. Instead, it places them together as though they occurred in perfect harmony. This is a testament to the brain's ability to create coherence from fragmented information. Think about it. The brain is constantly receiving signals from various senses: sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. It has to make sense of all these inputs and bring them together into a single narrative, one that feels smooth and continuous. The temporal binding illusion is just one example of how the brain works to create a unified experience of the world. This illusion is subtle. You may not even notice that the flash and the sound are slightly out of sync. But when you do notice, it's like a tiny crack in the fabric of perception. The world around you doesn't feel as seamless, as if the mind is revealing the hidden work it does to create your experience. The brain doesn't simply take in sensory data. It processes it, interprets it, and often it blends it together. The temporal binding illusion shows us that our minds are not passive observers. They actively shape our reality, making it feel more predictable, more cohesive than it might be in raw form. In everyday life, you experience temporal binding without even thinking about it. Every time you hear someone speak and see their lips move, your brain binds the two together, assuming they are perfectly synchronized, even though they are not always in perfect sync. The illusion happens because the brain is constantly filling in small gaps to create continuity. This phenomenon also speaks to the brain's reliance on expectations. You expect things to happen in a certain order: flash followed by sound or sound followed by flash. The brain takes these expectations and fills in the missing pieces when the sensory input is close enough. It's a way for the mind to reduce the complexity of the world around you. What's intriguing is that temporal binding is not limited to visual and auditory events. It can happen with other senses too. When you touch something, your brain expects the feeling to match the sight of the object. If there's a small delay, the brain blends the sensations together, making them feel like they happened at the same time. This trickery of the mind happens because the brain thrives on predictability. It wants the world to make sense, to be continuous. It doesn't want the world to feel fragmented. And so when small temporal gaps appear, the brain smooths them over, creating a perception that feels real, even though it's a product of the mind's making. Think about how we experience time. We don't always feel time passing in a linear way. Our brains group experiences together, tying them into a coherent stream, even if the events are slightly out of sync. The temporal binding illusion reveals that our experience of time is often constructed, shaped by the mind's need to create order and consistency. The more you pay attention to this illusion, the more you realize how much of what we perceive is actually a blend of sensory data, memory, and expectation. The brain is constantly weaving together a story, filling in gaps, and creating a seamless experience out of the fragments it receives. It's remarkable how the brain can make two events feel like one simply because they are close together in time. The temporal binding illusion is a window into how perception works. It's not just about receiving information, but about processing it, shaping it, and sometimes distorting it to create a world that feels whole and complete. When you think about temporal binding, it also makes you wonder about the other illusions the mind creates. How many of the things we perceive are not direct representations of the world, but constructions, products of the brain's need to make sense of the chaos around us? The mind is constantly working to fill in the blanks, creating a smooth, continuous narrative. The temporal binding illusion also reveals just how much our brains rely on synchronization. In the world around us, events happen in a continuous flow, but they don't always occur perfectly together. The brain fills in the gaps, making it seem as though everything is aligned. It's a delicate balance, one that keeps our experience of the world steady, even though it's constantly shifting. This illusion, in its subtlety, shows us that reality is not as solid as it seems. What we perceive as smooth, continuous experience is often a product of the brain's work behind the scenes. The events we think of as happening together might not always be in sync. They might be just slightly out of place, and yet the brain makes them feel like one. As you think about this illusion, remember that perception is never as simple as it seems. The temporal binding illusion is just one example of how our brains are constantly at work, blending information together to create a version of reality that feels whole, even when the world around us is fragmented and in motion. You're holding two objects in your hands. One is large, seemingly heavy. The other is small, compact but unexpectedly light. You expect the larger object to be the heavier one. Yet, when you lift them, something strange happens. The larger object feels surprisingly light, and the smaller one feels heavier. This is the size-weight illusion, where the brain tricks you into feeling the weight of an object based not on its actual mass, but on its size. It's as though your mind is using the size of the object to predict how heavy it should feel, and when those expectations are wrong, your senses are confused. At first, it seems counterintuitive. A bigger object should feel heavier, right? But the size-weight illusion shows that perception doesn't always align with physical reality. The brain uses size as a cue to estimate weight, and when that estimation is off, it creates an experience where the weight feels mismatched with what you expect. The illusion happens because the brain assumes that larger things are heavier. This assumption is based on past experiences. Larger objects typically have more mass. So when you encounter an object that defies this rule, your brain is left to reconcile what it expects with what it feels, causing the weight to feel different from what it truly is. What's particularly fascinating about this illusion is how automatic it is. You don't consciously decide that a large object should feel heavy. It's an expectation that's built into your mind, shaped by experience. When that expectation is challenged, you don't simply adjust it immediately. The brain creates a false perception, making the object feel lighter or heavier than it is. This illusion also reveals something about how perception works. We don't see the world as it is. Instead, we interpret it based on past knowledge, assumptions, and predictions. The brain isn't a passive recorder, it's an active participant, constantly filling in gaps and making educated guesses about the world. When those guesses are wrong, we feel the disconnect. It's easy to think that we experience the world directly, that what we see and feel is a reflection of reality. But the size-weight illusion shows us that our senses are not just receiving information. They are interpreting it, predicting what should happen, and sometimes creating an experience that doesn't quite match the physical world. When you lift the smaller object and it feels heavier than the larger one, it feels strange, as if something is out of place. But this sensation is a result of the brain's effort to create a coherent, consistent experience, even when the world doesn't always fit into neat, predictable patterns. In many ways, the size-weight illusion is a metaphor for how we navigate the world. We rely on expectations, assumptions, and patterns to guide us, but what happens when those patterns break down? How do we respond when the world doesn't conform to what we think it should be? The size-weight illusion shows us that our perception is built on fragile, constantly shifting assumptions. This illusion is a reminder that perception is not fixed, it's fluid, malleable, shaped by context, experience, and expectation. The brain doesn't simply react to what's in front of us, it interprets, fills in the gaps, and creates a world that feels predictable, even when it's not. The size-weight illusion also speaks to how we experience the physical world. Our senses don't simply report on the size or weight of things, they create an experience based on what we've learned and expect. This experience is often shaped by past encounters, but what happens when those expectations are wrong? The brain fills in the gaps, often creating an illusion. What's even more interesting is how this illusion plays out with objects of different materials. A large foam block and a small metal ball might feel completely different, even though their weights are vastly different. The brain's reliance on size and expectation creates a distorted sense of how we experience the weight of these objects. This illusion also asks us to consider how much of our reality is constructed by the mind. We assume that what we feel is accurate, that our senses give us a clear, direct view of the world. But the size-weight illusion reminds us that our senses are shaped by much more than what's physically present. They are influenced by context, memory, and expectation. Think about how often we rely on our predictions. We expect things to behave in a certain way based on past experiences. When that prediction is off, the brain struggles to adjust. The size-weight illusion is a perfect example of this. The brain expects one thing, but the reality of the object's weight doesn't match. The result is a surprising, and often perplexing, sensory experience. The illusion can be subtle, but its impact is powerful. The next time you hold an object and expect it to feel a certain way, pay attention to how your brain makes predictions about its weight. Notice how these expectations shape your experience. What happens when the weight doesn't match the size? How does the brain adjust? The size-weight illusion also challenges our understanding of perception. We think of our senses as clear, direct windows into the world, but the reality is more complex. Perception is a process of interpretation, filled with assumptions and predictions, and sometimes those predictions can be wrong, creating experiences that feel real, but are based on misinterpretations. In a way, the illusion also asks us to question how much of what we feel is truly real. If the size of an object can make it feel lighter or heavier than it actually is, how much of our perception of the world is shaped by expectations rather than by objective reality? The brain works hard to make things feel predictable, but that predictability can sometimes distort the truth. The size-weight illusion is a subtle but powerful example of how our brains shape our experience of the world. We think of ourselves as perceiving things directly, but in truth we are constantly interpreting, filling in gaps, and making predictions about the world around us. What we feel is often not what's physically there, but a creation of the mind. You reach out with your hand, expecting to feel the smooth surface of a table, but instead, you feel nothing. Then, a strange sensation arises, a soft pressure, a touch, as though your hand is gently being guided. But your hand is not where you feel it, it's somewhere else, a virtual space. This is the virtual hand ownership illusion, a phenomenon where your brain tricks you into feeling a sense of ownership over a hand that isn't actually yours. In this illusion, the virtual hand feels just as real as your own. You believe it's part of you, even though it's simply a computer-generated image. At first, the experience feels odd. You see the virtual hand move, mimicking your own motions. As it touches an object in front of you, you feel a gentle response, as though the hand is truly yours. The sensation is a combination of sight, touch, and expectation, blending together into a seamless experience. What's remarkable is how quickly the brain can accept the virtual hand as its own. Your visual system sees the hand moving in sync with your own, and your brain takes this as confirmation that the hand belongs to you. Even though you know the hand is not real, it starts to feel like an extension of your body. This illusion happens because the brain integrates sensory information from multiple sources: vision, touch, and proprioception, the sense of where your body is in space. When these sources align, the brain begins to accept the virtual hand as part of your body, creating a sensation of ownership, even if the hand isn't physically there. The virtual hand, though not real, becomes part of your body's map. The brain doesn't differentiate between real and virtual sensations if they are processed in the same way. This is why when the virtual hand is touched, you feel it as if your own hand were being gently grazed. What's fascinating is how the brain uses expectation to fill in the gaps. Even if you know the hand is virtual, your brain believes the feedback it's receiving. The combination of visual and tactile cues creates a powerful illusion, making you feel connected to something that doesn't truly exist. It's as though the mind is willing to suspend disbelief. The experience can be unsettling at first. The hand feels so real, yet it's clearly not. This blurring of the line between what's real and what's virtual shows just how flexible the brain is. The brain doesn't just process the physical world as it is. It builds a reality based on sensory input, regardless of whether that input comes from the physical world or a digital one. This illusion also highlights how we experience ownership. The virtual hand isn't yours, but once it begins to move as you do, your brain adopts it. It's a reflection of how we claim parts of the world as our own, how the mind creates ownership based on interaction and experience, not just physical connection. You might think that you'd feel separate from the virtual hand, that you would always know it's not real. But as the illusion deepens, it becomes harder to distinguish between the virtual hand and your own. This raises questions about how much of our experience is shaped by what we perceive, and how much of that perception is based on the brain's interpretation of sensory data. What's even more striking is how the brain can create a sense of embodiment for something that's entirely artificial. The virtual hand becomes a part of your body's sensory map, even though it has no real presence in the physical world. The mind's ability to construct reality based on sensory cues is both powerful and deeply fascinating. The virtual hand ownership illusion is not just about sight and touch, it's about how our brains create a cohesive sense of self based on the sensory information it receives. When the virtual hand moves as you do, the brain accepts it as part of your body, and that sensation becomes just as real as anything else. This illusion also tells us something about how we experience our own bodies. We tend to think of our bodies as fixed, as things we own and control, but the reality is more fluid. The brain creates a sense of ownership, of connection, based on interaction, not just physical touch. The virtual hand becomes yours, not because it's real, but because the brain says it is. Imagine how often we rely on our senses to create a sense of connection. Whether we're reaching for an object or interacting with the world, the brain constantly builds our experience of reality. The virtual hand is just one example of how the brain can shape what we believe to be true, even when it's not based in physical reality. What's even more curious is how this illusion can be used to explore the mind's understanding of body ownership. In experiments with virtual reality, people can be made to feel as though a virtual arm is theirs, simply by synchronizing visual and tactile cues. The brain doesn't need the arm to be real, it just needs the cues to align. The more you think about the virtual hand, the more you begin to see how flexible perception truly is. The brain doesn't just passively receive information, it shapes the experience, creating a world that feels solid and real, even when it's built from illusions. The virtual hand is just one example of how the mind can blur the lines between the real and the imagined. This illusion is also a reminder of how much we take our sense of self for granted. The body, the hand, the arm, they feel like part of us, but how much of that is based on sensory experience, and how much is built by the mind. The virtual hand shows us that our sense of ownership isn't always grounded in physical reality. It's shaped by the brain's interpretations. As you continue to experience the virtual hand, the illusion deepens. The hand moves in tandem with your own, and the sensation of ownership grows stronger. You begin to forget that the hand is not real. It's a reflection of how the brain creates reality, not just what's in front of you, but how it makes you feel connected to what's not there. In the silence, the world disappears. You are in a room, void of sound, light, and sensation. At first, there is peace, a strange calm that fills the empty space. But then, slowly, something changes. The quiet starts to stretch and bend, and you begin to feel things that aren't there. This is sensory deprivation, a state where the senses are stripped away, leaving nothing but emptiness. It's in this emptiness that the mind starts to create. Without external stimuli, the brain begins to hallucinate, filling the void with images, sounds, or feelings that seem real but aren't. The brain is designed to constantly interpret the world, to make sense of the sensory input it receives. But when that input is removed, the mind doesn't simply stop, it continues to process, creating its own reality. In the absence of external information, the brain generates its own. This is how induced hallucinations begin. At first, you might not notice the change. It starts small, perhaps a fleeting image, a faint sound, or a sensation you can't quite place. But soon, these hallucinations grow stronger as the mind, desperate to fill the silence, begins to weave its own stories. What was once peaceful now feels strange and unsettling. You may begin to see shapes, shadows, or even figures that weren't there. They appear in the edges of your vision, blurry and unclear, but still real in your mind. The brain, working to fill in the missing sensory input, creates a world that feels tangible, even though it's completely fabricated. The mind doesn't stop at visual hallucinations. Sounds that aren't there begin to appear. Maybe it's a voice, a whisper, or the echo of footsteps. In the quiet, the brain fills the void with sounds, some pleasant, some unsettling. It's as if the mind cannot stand silence and must fill it with whatever it can conjure. These hallucinations aren't the result of anything external. They are born from within, crafted by the brain in response to the lack of stimuli. The mind, always active, begins to create, pulling fragments from memory, imagination, and subconscious thought to form a reality where there is none. What's interesting is that these hallucinations can feel completely real. The brain's ability to generate these experiences is so powerful that it can trick you into believing that the images and sounds are part of the actual world. Even though they aren't real, they feel just as real as anything else you've experienced. In a way, these hallucinations show us how perception is not always about what is in front of us. It's about how the brain interprets and processes the world. When the usual input is absent, the brain doesn't just stop. It adapts, creating its own reality to fill the void, to maintain continuity, to make the world feel whole again. This phenomenon reveals something deeper about the nature of consciousness. We are not simply passive recipients of the world around us. Our minds are constantly constructing, interpreting, and creating reality. When external stimuli are removed, the brain doesn't wait in silence. It continues its work, building a world from within, even when nothing is there to support it. These induced hallucinations also speak to the power of expectation. When you enter a state of sensory deprivation, you may not consciously expect to see or hear anything, but the brain has its own expectations. It expects sensory input, and when it doesn't get it, it starts filling in the blanks. The result is a world created from your mind's own patterns. What's also intriguing is that these hallucinations are often influenced by what you've experienced before. The brain draws on memories, emotions, and past experiences to create what it believes should be present. The result is a blending of past and present, a fusion of reality and imagination, where the two seem indistinguishable. These hallucinations show us that perception is not a direct reflection of the world. What we experience is shaped by the mind's constant effort to make sense of everything. It's a dynamic process, constantly adapting to new information, but also constructing reality from what it already knows. The mind, it seems, cannot exist without creating something to perceive. In some ways, the experience of sensory deprivation is like the mind's own dream state. It's a world built from fragments, a reality created from nothing but thought. The difference is that in a dream we expect it. In sensory deprivation, the brain is forced to create something without the usual external cues. The result is a strange blending of fact and fantasy. The hallucinations caused by sensory deprivation are not random. The mind follows patterns, drawing from the subconscious to create a reality that feels real. It's as though the mind is following a script, pulling from the past to create an experience that feels grounded, even though it's entirely fabricated. This experience reminds us how much of what we perceive is based on the brain's interpretation of the world. We don't simply see, hear, or feel what's out there. We see, hear, and feel what the brain creates from the information it receives. And when that information is lacking, the brain fills the gaps, sometimes with startling results. Sensory deprivation doesn't just stop at visuals or sounds. It can affect all the senses. In the absence of tactile input, the brain may create the feeling of touch, pressure, or movement. The mind, seeking to maintain continuity, fills in the blanks, creating a world where nothing is missing, even though the reality is entirely fabricated. When you think about the nature of these hallucinations, you begin to realize how much of reality is shaped by the mind. We like to think of the world as something objective, something fixed, but the truth is that our experience of the world is built by the mind, a creation of perception, interpretation, and expectation. In sensory deprivation, the mind proves just how far it can go in constructing a world where there is none. It shows us that perception is not a passive experience. It's an active creative process, one that is constantly working to make sense of the world, even when the world itself is silent, still, and empty.